Chapter 1346. The person who came was the new 1031 St Division's commander, Gong Pengju. This time, he was ordered by Commander Qin Feng to deliver a message to Gao Yu. Since the other party had already lost contact with the outside world, they needed to explain the situation and shatter the other party's illusions. Army Supervisor Gao, I am the commander of 1031st Division, Gong Pengju. I am here to deliver a message to Army Supervisor Gao. Gong Pengju's voice was solemn. There was no other expression on his face. There was no so-called arrogance or flattery. Gao Rang was very satisfied with Gong Pengju's attitude. What he was most afraid of was the other party's arrogance. Although he was at a disadvantage now, he still had hundreds of thousands of soldiers in his hands. If the other party's attitude was too arrogant, how could he tolerate it? Speak. Since the other party's attitude was not bad, Gao Yu was also interested to hear what they had to say. At this time, not only Gao Yu, but even Li Keguang and Ho Xianxia pricked up their ears. Intuition told them that the messenger of the five-star army must have something important to say. When a pin drop could be heard in the tent, Gong Pengju's voice was loud and clear. Army Supervisor Gao, just a day ago, Liaodong's 100,000 cavalry were surrounded and annihilated by Bug Nam of Gojoseon. Fang Dingshan was captured. Luo Baikuan, Mu Qiong, and others died in battle. 3 days ago, our five-star army captured Tulu City. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers who escaped to Wanquan City, the other 110,000 soldiers were captured. In other words, you are already a lone army in the grasslands. If my king's guess is correct, you don't have much food left. Considering that we are all Han, out of humanitarian reasons, your wounded soldiers can be sent out of the camp. We will arrange for people to receive them and treat them. At this time, Gao Yu's face was already very red. Intuition told him that the other party's words could be true, but he would never admit it verbally. Fang Dingshan's 100,000 Liaodong cavalry were so powerful. How could they be destroyed so easily? They must be lying to him. In a fit of anger, Gao Yu suddenly shouted, "Impossible, this is impossible. You must be trying to shake our morale, so you spread such rumors here." In the face of Gao Yu's yelling, Gong Pengju shook his head in disappointment. This time, if the Beiming army didn't listen to Gao Yu's words and took the initiative to attack, it would have taken a lot of effort to deal with them. It could also be said that Gao Yu was at least 80% responsible for this defeat. Gong Pengju, who revered the strong, naturally looked down on all these actions. However, he wasn't going to remind the enemy out of kindness. Thus, he just shook his head and cupped his fist. "Inspector Gao, you don't have to believe me. I'm here to report this news to you. As for the wounded, it's best to hand them over. Otherwise, not only will they be unable to fight, they will also consume your limited food. It's really meaningless." Gong Pengju didn't wait for Gao Yu to make a decision. He turned around and left. His goal had been achieved, and his mission was completed. As for what would happen next, he believed that as long as Gao Yu wasn't stupid, he would definitely hand over the wounded. Gong Pengju had already left. Gao Yu, who was left in the tent, had a stupefied expression. Before the messenger came, he still had some hope and ideas in his heart. But now, all of these thoughts were shattered. He suddenly realized that he was like a clown. He had become someone who had been abandoned. No. She had made the wrong decision and abandoned herself. Who was the five-star army? If they were so easy to deal with, how could they drive Yeshin's world of Wara out of the grassland? If they were so easy to deal with, why were Annan and other countries, including the small Japanese Empire, and North Korea occupied by them? To think that he thought he was so powerful that he wanted to destroy the five-star army. Now, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were killed, captured, and surrounded. And all of this was because he gave the order to attack and leave the city. He was already a sinner through the ages. He could imagine how the officials and censors in the court would accuse him once the news reached Beiming's capital. The Daizong Emperor would hate him so much that even if he died now, it wouldn't be enough to make up for his crimes. Thinking that her life was completely ruined like this, Gao Yu's face was full of tears at this moment. She lay on the desk and cried loudly. This scene was seen clearly by Li Keguang and Ho Xianxia. This wasn't good news for them. Originally, he thought that by following behind Gao Yu, with this army of hundreds of thousands, in addition to Gao Yu's background in the palace, this trip would be gilded. Once he achieved military merits, he would be willing to spend money and return with an official position. How wonderful would that be? But now, Gao Yu's army had been defeated. Not only that, from the tone of the 5-star army's commander, their entire army of 400,000 was finished. What military merits did they have now? All that was left was a life-and-death crisis. A gentleman wouldn't stand under a collapsing wall. Although these two couldn't be considered gentlemen, they knew that life was precious. In order to survive, people like them were willing to do anything. While Gao Yu was still crying, Li Keguang and Ho Xianxia had already quietly left the tent. Not long after, the two met in a small tent. They dismissed everyone, and when there was no one else around, they no longer had any misgivings and spoke of their worries. Since they were vile people, they didn't have any so-called righteousness or loyalty in their eyes. They only cared about benefits and their lives. In the end, the two of them discussed and decided that in order to survive, they could only do something that would let down Gao Yu. If that didn't work, they would capture this person and surrender to the 5-star army. At the very least, they had to save their lives first. Due to their lack of understanding of the 5-star army, the two of them didn't immediately make this decision. First of all, they didn't fully believe Gong Pengju's words. What if the other party was lying to them? What if the reinforcements really appeared? Second of all, they wanted to see if the 5-star army really didn't kill captives. If that was the case, it wouldn't be too late for them to choose to surrender. Gong Pengju left. Although he didn't get a reply from Gao Yu, at least the 100,000 Baiming army that were surrounded had become obedient. Since there were no breakthroughs, it was obvious that their actions were effective. Naturally, this couldn't be separated from the secret agents that the intelligence agency had arranged in the Baiming army. They were either ordinary soldiers, or sergeants, or centurions. They didn't look very eye-catching. If the Baiming army's battle went smoothly, even if they said something unfavorable to the army, it wouldn't have any effect. But the sound of the wind and rain was completely different. Oftentimes, a single straw could overwhelm a camel at this time. Commander of Wan Quan. Information about the situation on the front line was constantly sent here. The fast horse scouts, the secret agents, the intelligence personnel of the Genie Guards, and the soldiers of the East Faction Guards were all active. Through their various efforts, in addition to the fact that Yang Chendong had no intention of covering up the news, some of the true situations were sent to Marquis Wuxia, Shi Heng, who was in charge of the formation here. At first, when he learned that Gao Yu's army was defeated, Shi Heng still had a trace of joy in his heart. You want to jump over me to take over the leadership? Now, you've suffered a defeat. Now you know why Marquis hasn't sent troops. The front line lost the battle. At least it proved that he was right. With this, Shi Heng ate an extra bowl of rice when he was eating. However, when the bad news came back, he lost his appetite. This was especially true when he learned that Talu City had been taken down by the 5 Astral Army. Of the 100,000 soldiers in the city, only 10,000 had managed to escape. The rest had been taken captive by the 5 Astral Army. He felt that the situation had spiraled out of control. Then when he heard that even the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry led by Fang Dingshan was defeated by the 5-star army, and half of them were killed and the other half were captured, Shi Heng's face completely changed. As someone who knew the situation in the army very well, Shi Heng knew the importance of the Liaodong cavalry better than anyone else. The Great Ming dynasty lacked horses and people who were good at riding. Otherwise, how could they have watched the Tatars and Walla dominate the grasslands? Even when Gaozu was alive, although he had conquered the grasslands several times and forced the Mongolian cavalry to flee, if one looked carefully, one could still find that they won because of the bravery of the soldiers, the courage of the generals, the help of firearms, and the advantage of military strength. More often than not, they used hundreds of thousands to fight against tens of thousands of Mongolian cavalry. In the end, wasn't it because they didn't have enough war horses and too few cavalry? Now that they finally had 100,000 cavalry, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that this was the foundation of Baiming's existence on the grasslands. It was because of these 100,000 cavalry that they dared to participate in the war. From time to time, they would cause trouble for the 5-star army to show their existence. If there was an opportunity, they would even bravely attack and give the 5-star army a head-on blow. This was the magic of cavalry. On the vast grasslands, they could come and go without a trace. They could use the shortest amount of time and the smallest price to do many things they wanted to do. Without these cavalry, they could only rely on their legs. There was no need to fight a war. Often, they would be tired to death. How could they cause trouble for others? What's with this Fang Dingshan? Shiheng shook his head in confusion. From the bottom of his heart, he admired Fang Dingshan very much. Although Fang Dingshan was a little greedy, he was forced to do so by the general situation. The atmosphere in northern Ming was like this. If one wanted to be a good official, he had to be filial to the academy. Otherwise, he would be dismissed. This was a common problem for Baiming and even southern Ming officials. It wasn't a problem. Moreover, Fang Dingshan was indeed good at fighting. Chapter 1347. Furthermore, this person also had a unique ability in training cavalry. Otherwise, how could he create 100,000 elite cavalry in such a short period of time? This was 100,000 cavalry. How could they be surrounded by the 5-star army and be so heavily injured? Could it be that if they couldn't win, they wouldn't run? How could Shiheng know that this wasn't a problem of running or not? Instead, Fang Dingshan thought that the opportunity had arrived and took the initiative to send himself to his death. If not, even if Yang Chendong personally took action, he would have to pay a huge price and time to deal with them. No matter what, Fang Dingshan had really lost. This was a huge matter. Thinking that his responsibility was about to become huge, Shiheng sat in front of the desk and started to write a memorial. He wanted to report this matter to the emperor and request for the emperor to send capable people to stabilize the situation in the Wanquan capital department. He also wanted to ask the imperial court for soldiers and salaries. Otherwise, if the 5-star army really attacked, how could he stop them? An urgent report was sent to the capital at the speed of 800 li. At this moment, the Baiming army was handing over 10,000 injured Han soldiers to the 5-star army. It was laughable to say that these injured soldiers were the products of the 5-star army's cavalry. Now, they needed the enemy's help to treat them. This also caused many of the injured soldiers to be filled with worry. They really didn't know what was going to happen to them. As the other Ming soldiers received the military order, they couldn't resist. They could only watch as their comrades were taken away by the 5-star army's cavalry. Their eyes were filled with an inexplicable fear and uncertainty about the future. At this moment, the morale of the Baiming army began to drop rapidly. After all, they were injured by the enemy and had to be sent to the enemy for treatment. No matter how one looked at it, there was nothing to be proud of. How could they win against such an enemy? The morale of the Baiming army continued to decline, especially during the process of handing over the wounded soldiers. Many Baiming army soldiers had worried looks on their faces. When the last wounded soldier was handed over, the Baiming army was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. If there was any sound, it would be the sound of sobbing. Everyone was worried about whether they would live or die the next day. It was basically impossible to rely on such an army to win a battle. But knowing this, Gao Yu was helpless. The food in the army was getting less and less, and it was a great waste to give it to the wounded. Although they had lost face and lost morale, at least they still had enough food to eat and wouldn't cause a mutiny in the army. This way they could still live. This was undoubtedly the best news. In the 5-star army, Commander Qin Feng was responsible for receiving the wounded. 5 miles behind them, temporary military tents had been set up. From afar, the Red Cross symbols were very obvious. The logistics department had already received orders from the commander, Xianxia, to arrange for the hospital to be located here. Just treating the wounded was not enough. Yang Chendong had sent a telegram that he wanted to take down the Baiming army without shedding any blood. Receiving the wounded was just the first step, which was also the most likely thing to be done without causing a stir in the Baiming army. When the wounded were sent to the logistics hospital 5 miles behind them, the doctors and nurses who had been on standby for a long time all went out. Even the medical staff in the army almost all rushed here. There were more than 10,000 wounded soldiers. If there were not enough people, how could they treat them? How could they make an effect in a short time? Commander Qin Feng rode on a tall horse and was shouting, "Hurry up, immediately classify the wounded. Those with minor injuries, quickly treat them. Whoever treats them first will get a military merit." Stimulated by the military merit, all the medical staff became excited. Some of the Baiming army soldiers with minor injuries even became the target of the crowd. Qin Feng did not stop all this. He just needed to maintain order and make sure that there were no problems. At the same time, He admired Yang Chendong even more in his heart. As the person in charge of the specific work, Qin Feng naturally knew Yang Chendong's plan. It was precisely because he understood enough that he was more impressed by Yang Chendong's power. He firmly believed that doing so would definitely have an effect. He was looking forward to what would happen the moment the effect appeared. In the Baiming army, the wounded soldiers were sent out, but Gao Yu was still sitting alone in the tent. At this moment, the army was surrounded and the reinforcements were captured. Gao Yu, who had become an isolated army, did not know what to do. He did not dare to go out of the tent, because once he went out, he would face the sorrowful eyes of thousands of soldiers. This made Gao Yu very scared, because he did not know what these soldiers would do once they were angry. Would they come to make trouble for him? Or even kill him? He did not dare to go out of the tent, so he just hid in the main tent like a coward. He forced himself to think optimistically. Wu Qingho must have known what happened here, and he must have found a way to save him. It was also at this time that Gao Yu remembered Shi Heng's good. He also regretted not listening to him. Otherwise he would have made mistakes. How could it be like now, where the 400,000 soldiers were destroyed and now they were in a situation where they could neither advance nor retreat? Time passed by slowly. In the 5-star Army Battlefield Hospital, the first lightly wounded soldier had been successfully treated and walked out of the camp when it was almost dark. Originally, this person's injury was not very serious. Speaking of which, this was related to Li Laoxi's good luck. The arrow shot by the 5-star Army cavalry hit his calf, making him a glorious wounded soldier, and also avoided the bad result of fighting with the 5-star Army. Li Laoxi was born in a poor family, which could be seen from his somewhat perfunctory name. Speaking of which, in the Great Ming Dynasty, not everyone had the opportunity to learn to read and write. Only those who had accumulated merit and family property could learn to read and write. For example, Zhu Yuanzhang used to be called Zhu Zhongba. Because Li Laoxi was the 4th son in the family, he had this seemingly old-fashioned name. Li Laoxi, who had never had enough to eat, warm clothes, or good luck since he was young, suddenly changed and became the first patient in the logistics hospital to be treated. He still remembered when he appeared in the field hospital with a sorrowful expression. He didn't know what the future would be like and whether he would die. At that time, a group of doctors and nurses in white coats rushed in front of him. Yes, they rushed in front of him. He did not know what a doctor was, but he knew that they should be a doctor. As for nurses, it was the first time he heard such a name. What was even worse was that he found that these nurses were all young women, and there was no lack of beautiful women among them. Since young Li Laoxi, who was poor, did not have many opportunities to talk about marriage, and usually, he did not have many opportunities to see women. After all, before women were married, they were particular about not going out of the house, and not taking a step out was virtuous. But now, there were so many beautiful female nurses in close contact with him, and they did not mind that he was dirty, nor did they care about how long he had not bathed, or whether there was a strange smell on his body. They rushed over and cared about him, and they even dared to touch and look around his body without any intention of disliking him. At this moment, even Li Laoxi's eyes and face turned red. For the first time, he felt ashamed of having a strange smell on his body. Presumably, this was a manifestation of his self-esteem. The doctors and nurses were not only concerned on the surface, but they were really concerned about Li Laoxi's injury. They first used a high degree of alcohol unique to Xianxia to disinfect it. Then, they tested the depth of the arrow's penetration into the skin. After confirming that it did not hurt the bones, they pulled it out with a swish. Then they stopped the bleeding, bandaged the wound, and gave it a nutrient solution. In fact, Li Laoxi's injury was not that serious, and the arrow did not penetrate his skin very deeply. However, because there were too many examples of people who were shot by arrows and died because they pulled out the arrow, it forced others to feel a sense of fear. After a round of emergency treatment, Li Laoxi finally stood up when it was dark and could walk on his own. For this, the doctors and nurses who had received military merits were naturally very happy. There was even a nurse who was so excited that she even walked forward and hugged Li Laoxi. Although this nurse was a little short and a little plump, Yang Chendong's aesthetic standards did not give her a high rating. However, in Li Laoxi's eyes, it was completely different. What was a short person? Without enough nutrition, they could not even eat their fill. Being short was just a common problem in the Great Ming Dynasty. As for being a little fat, that was a good thing. With thick fat, It would be very useful to warm the bed at night. More importantly, a fat person's buttocks would also be a little bigger. That was proof that they could give birth to babies. At this moment, Li Laoxi's heart was moved. At this time, when the doctor and nurse suggested that Li Laoxi should go and see the surrounded Baiming soldiers in a fully healed state, he agreed without any hesitation. Not only that, he also decided to follow the 5-star army in the future. If there was anything that motivated him, it would be that he wanted to marry this fat nurse. He had already heard that as long as he achieved military merits in the 5-star army and became an officer of a certain rank, he could apply for marriage. He also had the qualifications to find a female soldier as his wife if both parties were in love. Although Li Laoxi did not know what it meant to be in love, he did not understand. However, he knew that he liked this female nurse, and this female nurse was not betrothed yet. All of this was enough. Li Laoxi was the first to be treated. Before dawn the next day, there were more than 200 lightly injured people who walked out of their beds. They belonged to the group that did not have a lot of injuries, but they lacked sufficient medical help. When Commander Qin Feng arrived at the hospital early in the morning and saw the more than 300 Baiming soldiers who could already move freely, his eyes lit up. Good job. All the medical personnel have meritorious service. Later, report the specific name list. By the way, have they finished their ideological work? Chapter 1348. The doctors and nurses who had been waiting for the results all cheered happily when they heard that they could record the merit. When they were asked if they had done a good job, everyone answered excitedly, "Yes, they are grateful for our kindness and are willing to do things obediently." The ancients were mostly kind people. Naturally, they would repay the kindness of saving their lives. Furthermore, the request made by the doctors and nurses was not excessive. They only wanted them to walk around the encirclement of the northern Ming army. It was not dangerous or tiring, and they could even repay their benefactors for saving their lives. So, why would they not do it? The answers of the medical staff made Commander Qin Feng very satisfied. He was in a good mood and immediately waved his arms and said, "Very good, let's go and prepare. All right, take out the pigs and beef and give them to the Han soldiers who have abandoned the dark side. The quantity must be sufficient." Pigs were also called porpoises in the Great Ming Dynasty. They did not have much value in the past. In the end, it was because the way they were raised was not profitable and they could not be fattened. The input and output were not proportional, so naturally, they were not paid attention to. The appearance of Yang Chendong changed everything. Not long after the boars were born, he fanned them. The pigs, who had no desires, began to eat and sleep. They had no desire to pursue a life of eating and sleeping. Naturally, their bodies also began to grow. Now, pork had become one of the indispensable meat in the entire Xianxia army. Even in the first city, there were a lot of pigs. This time, a lot of them were transported to the front line. Now, it was not difficult to take out a small portion to provide for more than 300 wounded people. The more than 300 wounded people who had basically recovered had something in their hands. Some were holding a pig's trotter, some were fat pig's knuckle, and some were holding delicious beef. Under the protection of the cavalry of the 5-star army, they walked towards the encampment of the Baiming army. The originally listless and unmotivated Baiming army camp suddenly had a lot of cavalry of the 5-star army outside, which immediately attracted everyone's attention. Under the heavy encirclement, the Baiming army did not need to train anymore. This way they could save some food. They, who had nothing to do, suddenly found something interesting to watch. They quickly gathered together and stared at the slowly approaching 5-star army cavalry. The 5-star army's cavalry approached as if there was no one around. When the two sides were only 150 paces apart, and were about to reach the range of the arrows, the cavalry stopped advancing, and began to line up on both sides. In this way, the 300 or so Baiming army soldiers who had recovered from their wounds appeared in front of everyone. They were all tearing up the meat in their hands, and their faces were filled with satisfaction. This sudden scene naturally aroused the curiosity of the Baiming soldiers. They didn't know what the 5-star army was up to, so they just watched with wide eyes. But as he watched, he suddenly heard a shout. "Hey, isn't that Zhang Qi? Wasn't his arm injured? That arrow was still stuck in his arm yesterday. Why does it look like nothing happened now?" "That's Li Laoxi. We're from the same hometown. He was shot in the calf, But why is he moving freely now? That's Xiaoxia too. He was also shot in the calf, but... Shouts sounded one after another. Only then did everyone realize that the people who appeared here were the wounded soldiers who were sent out yesterday. They were also their comrades. They were still wounded yesterday, but now, not only had their bodies recovered, they were even eating and drinking. This scene stimulated many people. Some of the soldiers who were useless, or who had not eaten their fill, couldn't help but swallow. It was obvious that they were hungry. Li Laosi and the others were like giant pandas being watched by people. They stood there and walked back and forth, trying their best to show off their abilities. Of course, their mouths weren't idle either. They kept eating and looking very happy. The display didn't last very long. In less than an hour, the 5-star army cavalry retreated with the 300 or so Baiming prisoners. They didn't speak on the way here, but when they left, they shouted, "If there are any more wounded soldiers, our 5-star army will continue to receive them." The 5-star army finally left. The remaining Baiming army soldiers looked at each other. They didn't know what to do. If they didn't fight, where would the wounded soldiers come from? Were these words passed down wrongly? However, there were also some astute people. After their eyes kept rolling, a ruthless look flashed past, as if they had made some kind of decision. Not long after, more than an hour, many wounded soldiers suddenly appeared in the barracks. They had some knife wounds on their arms or legs. In their own words, they accidentally injured themselves when they were training hard. In order to save food, Gao Yu had already ordered that there was no need to train. However, there were still people who took the initiative to train and got injured. Even the slowest person would know what had happened. How could it be an accident? It was clearly intentional. It was hard for these people. In order to pretend to be wounded soldiers, they were so ruthless that they used their own bodies to cut themselves. At the same time, some ruthless soldiers followed suit. The number of wounded soldiers in the Baiming army began to increase. Before noon, there were more than 10,000 wounded soldiers, and this number was still increasing. When the results were reported to Gao Yu in the main tent, he only blinked a few times and knew what had happened. Although he didn't step out of the tent, as an embroidered uniform guard, he still placed a lot of spies outside to ensure that he would know immediately if something important happened. Of the wounded soldiers who were sent away yesterday, more than 300 of them were healed today. Of course, he knew about this. He had also lamented the strength of the 5-star army's logistical support. At least in this aspect, the Baiming army couldn't do it. However, it was just a sigh. In Gao Yu's eyes, the thing that the Great Ming dynasty didn't lack the least was people. Especially after Ran Xuanji's rule, the Great Ming dynasty's population had nearly doubled. In the eyes of the officials, people were the most worthless existence. The 5-star army expended a lot of effort to heal the wounded. This was a waste of resources, and it must have cost a lot. With this money, wouldn't it be better to build a new army? With this mentality, Gao Yu didn't take this matter to heart. It wasn't until he heard the report that there were more than 10,000 wounded soldiers in the army, and the number was still increasing, that his face changed greatly. Gao Yu wasn't a brainless person. On the contrary, his thoughts were very active, and he quickly figured out the truth of the matter. It was because of this that he was very angry. In order to openly surrender to the 5-star army, these soldiers actually had the courage to harm themselves. At this time, Gao Yu wanted to give the order to not send the wounded soldiers to the 5-star army's barracks. He wanted to see these soldiers fall into a trap of their own making. However, he quickly shook his head. At this time, it was easy to neglect, but not easy to stop. Otherwise, a mutiny in the army would be unavoidable. Thinking that there wasn't much food left in the army, it would be better to send these soldiers who didn't have any integrity out. They could save a lot of food. Thus, he simply waved his pen and agreed to send these wounded soldiers to the 5-star army's barracks. At night, more than 18,000 Baiming soldiers with all kinds of minor injuries were sent back to the barracks by the 5-star army's cavalry. When the other Baiming army soldiers saw this scene, they fell into deep thought. As a result, on that night, more than 70,000 wounded soldiers were sent back to the barracks. This was a serious injury to his muscles and bones. Currently, Gao Yu only had 130,000 soldiers. If these 70,000 soldiers were sent away, he would only have less than 50,000 soldiers left. How could he contend against the 5-star army with such a small amount of soldiers? He was afraid that once the enemy charged over, he would be finished. However, if he agreed, wouldn't he be digging his own grave? If he didn't agree, he was afraid of a mutiny in the army. At this moment, Gao Yu realized that he had overestimated the loyalty of these soldiers to Baiming. Did he think that only a few soldiers with no moral integrity would surrender? Gao Yu didn't know what integrity was. When a person didn't even have enough to eat, what integrity was there to talk about? If you tried to talk to him, it would be a light punishment if he didn't beat you until you couldn't take care of yourself. Gao Yu was having a headache. Li Keguang and Hou Xianxia were also having a headache in a general's tent not far from the main tent. They had previously thought of surrendering to the 5-star army in order to survive. In fact, they had even made up their minds to tie up Gao Yu and surrender to the 5-star army. But now, the situation had suddenly changed. Countless wounded soldiers had appeared. It seemed that they didn't need to tie people up to achieve their goal. The 5-star army treated the wounded extremely well. They didn't even kill normal soldiers. As generals, they shouldn't be killed so easily. Why don't we stab ourselves too? Hou Xianxia thought about it and discussed with Li Keguang. How can we do that? Our bodies, hair, and skin were all given to us by our parents. How can we do something like self-harm? How can we face our parents who raised us? Li Keguang said righteously. However, only he knew that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Hou Xianxia was reprimanded and his face was a little red. How could he bring himself to do it? He just couldn't think of a way, so he gave it a try. Then what should we do? There are more than 70,000 wounded soldiers. Once we surrender, we'll be done for. Without an army, even if we're captured by the 5-star army in the end, we won't have any merits. No merits? This answer made Li Keguang very unhappy. He shook his head. No, we're generals. How can we be the same as other people? Even if we surrender, the 5-star army still has to earn merits. Are we really going to go against our superiors? Hou Xianxia said with a bitter face. Chapter 1349. When Li Keguang heard that they were going against their superiors, a trace of hesitation appeared in his eyes. However, he quickly clenched his teeth and said, "This isn't us going against our superiors, but rather, we're rescuing Army Supervisor Gao. Think about it, even we can see the current situation clearly. How smart is Army Supervisor Gao? How could he not see that the situation is hopeless? He didn't surrender only because he didn't want to lose face. Since that's the case, why don't we fulfill his wish?" Fulfill his wish? Hou Xianxia had already thought of a certain possibility. Yes, fulfill his wish. How about this? We'll go find the other generals and say that Army Supervisor Gao doesn't agree to send these 70,000 wounded out. He wants to fight to the death with the 5-star army. That way, they'll definitely listen to us. You and I can bring over 100,000 people to surrender to the 5-star army. It'll definitely be a great merit. Li Keguang said as if he had made some sort of decision. Since they wanted to make a contribution, they had to make ample preparations and succeed in one strike. Li Keguang had clearly made enough preparations and thought about a lot of things. Hou Xianxia, who had always followed Li Keguang's lead, knew that he didn't have a choice. Moreover, he also had the same thoughts. He immediately nodded heavily. All right, I fully support Brother Li. I'll do whatever you say. Then let's gather the generals. Li Keguang's eyes carried a trace of ferocity. In order to survive, in order to make a contribution, he had made up his mind. Not far away in the tent, Gao Yu was still having a headache. The changes in the army were beyond his expectations. He was somewhat at a loss. Who knew if more wounded people would appear tomorrow after handing over these 70,000 people? If they all surrendered, he would become a general without an army. Then, what was the point of holding on? Just as he was feeling conflicted, a burst of noise suddenly came from outside the tent. This made Gao Yu, who was already in a bad mood, couldn't help but shout loudly, "Who's making a racket outside the tent?" Gao Yu was the army supervisor and now the highest-ranking general in the army. When he was angry, he still had some dignity. However, this time, he had clearly miscalculated because the tent's curtain had already been lifted from the outside. Then, armored Li Keguang, Hou Xianxia, and the others appeared in front of him with blades. Looking at the military uniforms in his hands, Gao Yu was still somewhat puzzled. What were they trying to do? Was there going to be a big war? Why was his commander completely unaware of this? While he was in a daze, Li Keguang suddenly pointed at him and said, "Come on, tie him up." As soon as he finished speaking, 4 big men rushed forward. Before Gao Yu could resist, they had already held him down and put him on the rope. Gao Yu was also a martial artist, so it was not easy for him to be restrained so easily. However, the person who came was too fast. When he was tied up, he was still a mess. Only when he felt that his arm could no longer move did he remember something. He shouted, "Li Keguang, you dare to rebel? Do you want to be exterminated?" "All right, Inspector Gao, you don't have to shout anymore. As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. This general brought everyone here to save you. Now shut his mouth. We'll talk about it again when he thinks clearly." Of course, Li Keguang was afraid that his family would be exterminated. However, this time, he had already convinced the generals. Everyone made the decision together and even signed their names. With this evidence, even if the Imperial court questioned them, everyone's words and deeds would be the same. Then, when the Imperial court found out about this matter, would they punish everyone? Would the Imperial court do this? In Li Keguang's opinion, they would not. Now, the Imperial court was in need of people. If they really did this, it would only disappoint the generals. What's more, the Li family had some influence. Together with the other generals, they weren't an existence that could be bullied by anyone. Of course, after surrendering to the 5-star army, Li Keguang also had to rely on Bugnam of Gojoseon's help to intercede. With this two-pronged approach, he was naturally relieved. Gao Yu was tied up tightly. That night, there were many more people on night duty in the Baiming army camp. At dawn, a fast horse left the camp, carrying the integrity and request of Li Keguang and others, and went straight to the 5-star army. Gao Yu was actually arrested. After Qin Feng saw the letter sent by the Baiming messenger, he was somewhat surprised. However, after thinking about it carefully, everything was reasonable. Surrendering was, of course, a good thing. However, Li Keguang and others also made their own request. That was, they wanted Bugnam of Gojoseon to intercede in front of the Baiming emperor for them. At least, they would not make things difficult for their families. Regarding this, Qin Feng did not dare to make a decision on his own. He immediately asked the messenger to wait for a moment. He used the radio to ask for instructions from Yang Chendong. Not long after, the message came back. Yang Chendong agreed to these people's request. He would also write a letter to the Baiming emperor to intercede for Li Keguang, Ho Xianxia, and other family members. As a defeated general, Zhu Qiyu would definitely not ignore the importance of this letter. Yang Chendong firmly believed in this point. After the messenger got a positive answer, he returned to the camp with joy. At this point, the last Baiming army on the grassland had all surrendered. In this battle, except for 10,000 people who escaped from the Baiming army, the rest of the 400,000 people were all killed or captured. In comparison, Baiming's military strength fell into a disadvantage. Yang Chendong returned triumphantly with 2,000 black cavalry and came to the first city. In the palace of the first city, Yang Chendong first met with a group of generals and praised their performance. Then, those who should perform meritorious deeds should perform meritorious deeds, and those who should be rewarded should be rewarded. After the generals retreated, Yu Mian, the lord of the first city, stood in front of Yang Chendong. Next to him was Tiger's Mane, the commander of the new army, and Yang Si, the commander of the logistics command. "You've worked hard," Yang Chendong said with a satisfied expression as he looked at these 3 trusted subordinates. "Young Master, 6th Young Master, has worked hard." The 3 of them did not dare to claim credit and quickly replied respectfully. "All right, we're not outsiders, so let's be casual. Now on this grassland, there's no Baiming army coming to cause trouble, and there's no Walla and Tartars harassment. Next, it's a period of great development. Are you ready?" Yang Chendong asked with bright eyes. "6th Young Master, as you said, everything is ready," Yu Mian replied with cupped fists. Yang Si, who was at the side, also had an excited look on his face. "Young Master, the people are in place and the tools are ready. We're just waiting for the order." What the 2 of them were talking about was what Yang Chendong had mentioned before. The silver mineral reserves on the grassland were astonishing. In the future, the Mongol Empire had benefited a lot from this place. Now that they had not appeared, and it was impossible for them to appear, these benefits naturally belonged to Xianxia. Just in this area alone, in terms of copper mines, in the future, it was known as China's 6 great copper veins. Its reserves and quality were the best in the world. In the Great Ming Dynasty, almost all of the Great Ming Dynasty's copper veins were in the hands of the Imperial court. Xianxia tried his best, but it was difficult to obtain them. But now it was different. Occupying this place was equivalent to having more mines. Not only that, but there were also large amounts of lead, zinc, cobalt, gold, and silver mines. This was a huge treasure trove. Yang Chendong didn't dare to do it before because there were too many uncertainties. If he couldn't guarantee safety, once the enemy appeared during the mining process, wouldn't he be making a wedding dress for others? Now that Bai Ming's army had been defeated, there were no other decent enemies here. The matter of mining could finally be brought up to his daily work. Good. I'll leave this matter to the 3 of you. Just follow the map. Believe in this prince, the results will definitely surprise you. Yang Chendong laughed loudly. After finishing this important matter, Yang Chendong talked about the Southern Ming Dynasty. We have won this battle. The request we made before will not change. 1 million people of the Great Ming Dynasty must be sent over. Then, you can choose a few suitable people and send them to Crimson City. Also, there is no need to return these hundreds of thousands of Bai Ming prisoners. If they must, Gao Yu and a few other generals can be sent back, but not a single soldier. Understand? This was Yang Chendong's arrangement for returning to Crimson City. Speaking of which, it had been more than 2 years since he left Crimson City. His wife and children were there, as well as many developing munitions factories. There were also too many things that he needed to worry about, so he had to go back. Tiger's Man and the other 2 naturally knew that the 6th young master was going back to Crimson City. Such military secrets would not be hidden from them. The 3 immediately knelt down and kowtowed. I wish the young master a safe journey and good health. Haha, good. I'll take advantage of your auspicious words. I'll leave the matters here to you. After laughing loudly, Yang Chendong immediately let Beta Persei attend the banquet. For a moment, the guests and the host were happy. On the morning of the 3rd day, Yang Chendong left the first city with 2,000 black cavalry and headed towards the 3 eastern provinces. Bai Ming's capital. In the throne room, there was a solemn atmosphere. A memorial was scattered on the ground, and the words written on it were floating everywhere. All the officials did not even dare to breathe loudly. Zhu Qiyu was really angry. Although he was able to obtain the throne, it was inseparable from the support of all the officials. However, the battle report sent by Marquis Shi Hang had angered him. At this moment, he was standing in front of the golden dragon throne with his hands on his waist. He looked like a shrew who was cursing in the street. The battle report was sent by Shi Hang. It was about the defeat of the Bai Ming army after they left Tulu City. Even though the situation regarding the aftermath hadn't arrived yet, just the news that the 5-star army was attacking Tulu City and that the city was already in danger was enough to make Zhu Qiyu's rage overflow to the heavens. Everyone knew that once Talu City was lost, the 400,000 soldiers of northern Ming would be like children without a mother. Unless they could take down Shi City, the 400,000 soldiers would not be able to return due to the lack of rations. All the ministers in the hall who had some brains naturally saw this. It was precisely because of this that no one dared to speak out. Chapter 1350. Say what? Tulu City was thousands of miles away. Now that there was a problem, it was too late to say anything. As for ordering the army to reinforce, Wu Qingho was in the Wanquan City Division. He should have gone to help, but he didn't because he had no soldiers at his disposal. What else could the others do? No matter what he said, it would be too late to do anything. The hall was silent, but Zhu Qiyu didn't vent his anger. He continued to glare with bloodshot eyes, his face filled with unwillingness as he roared, "Say something! Say something! Aren't you all quite powerful? The words of the Holy Sun come out of your mouth. Now that the country is in trouble, is there anyone who can share our burden?" The hall was still silent. This was war and people would die. It wasn't some ordinary task. If they couldn't do it well, they could think of a way to make up for it, or even find an excuse to make someone else take the blame. But on the battlefield, if they lost, they would be captured if they didn't die. How could there be room for excuses? Who wasn't afraid of death? This was especially true for the ministers who were used to the emperor's grace. They lived in luxury every day, only wishing that their days would be a bit slower. Who would take the initiative to seek death? The civil officials didn't say anything, and the generals were the same. No matter how powerful a general was, in the face of such a decline, what could they do? War required planning, which involved mobilizing troops, provisions, supplies, and familiarizing oneself with the situation of the army. Only then could one calmly make arrangements. But the attack on Tulu City was an unexpected situation. Who could turn the tide in such a short time? Not to mention that the generals had already been suppressed by the civil officials and lacked courage. Even if they had the ability, by the time they gathered the army and rushed to Tulu City, the city would have been occupied by the five-star army. They had already suffered defeat before the battle had even begun. How many people could bear the consequences? If they didn't go to war, they would only be cursed for being useless. Once they stepped forward to lead the army, they would undoubtedly be defeated. When the time came, not only would they have to bear the responsibility and be cursed, but it was also possible that their family would be exterminated. If that really happened, they would be the true sinners of their families. Everyone had their own thoughts, and no one had the courage to stand out. Zhu Qiyu, who was standing in front of the golden dragon throne, was deeply disappointed. Looking at these people who usually shouted "Long live the emperor," and claimed that they were willing to die 10,000 deaths for the emperor, at this moment, they had all become mutes and decorations. That deep sense of disappointment made him feel as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. Xiao Chen wanted to continue cursing, but after thinking about it, there was no point in doing so. He turned his head to the chief eunuch Jianghu and said, "Let's end the court session. The officials of the 6 ministries will stay. Court is dismissed." Jianghu, who was also pale with fright, hurriedly nodded as if she had heard the voice of heaven. Then, she announced the end of the court session. Soon, only the ministers of the 6 ministries were left in the originally crowded hall. Ever since the great Ming dynasty was divided into the north and the south, Zhu Qiyu, the acting grandmaster, abandoned the cabinet and directly handed over the specific matters to the 6 ministries' ministers, letting them be responsible for themselves. By doing so, he could naturally concentrate all the power on himself, but it was really tiring. Usually, he had to read memorials until midnight every day. Usually, after resting for more than 2 hours, the sky would brighten and it would be time for morning court. For the sake of the great Ming dynasty's revitalization, Zhu Qiyu suffered all the hardships. However, the effect was not obvious. Although it seemed that he had the support of the Zhu family's bank, and now had money and soldiers, he would always suffer a great loss whenever he faced the 5-star army. Previously, it was still okay, and the loss of soldiers and generals was within an acceptable range. However, this time, it involved an army of 400,000. His heart really ached. At this moment, the ministers of the 6 ministries were standing below the throne room. Each of them had their heads lowered like primary school students who had made a mistake. Zhu Qiyu looked down at the 6 ministries' ministers. His mood was not very good. Especially when his gaze landed on the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. A wave of anger rose from the bottom of his heart. This person had married his granddaughter to Yang Chendong. If someone said that such a person could be loyal to him, he definitely would not believe it. However, as the oldest official in the court, Hu Xiao could be said to have done things flawlessly. In addition, he had always been very popular, so it was not easy to find fault with him. Of course, he was just a minister. It was not difficult for Zhu Qiyu, who already had all the power in his hands, to remove him. However, he was worried. He was worried that if he suddenly stabbed Hu Xiao, it would incur the wrath of Yang Chendong. Although the 5-star army was strong, looking at its history, they had never found trouble with Baiming. On the contrary, it was always him who took the initiative to provoke them. Could it be that the 5-star army did not have the strength to do so? Zhu Qiyu did not think so. The reason why the other party did not make a move was because he had too many misgivings. For example, the members of the Yang family. Yang Chendong's brothers and sisters were all in the capital. Also, wasn't this Hu Xiao an existence that he was afraid of? As an emperor, he could not let his emotions affect his decisions. He had to consider all the relationships and take the big picture into consideration. Take this Hu Xiao for example. Although Zhu Qiyu knew that he could not sincerely use him, Given that he had not done anything to harm Bai Ming's interests, Zhu Qiyu could only tolerate him for now. Fortunately, as the countries around Bai Ming were all under Yang Chendong's control, the Bureau of Rights was of little use. Whether or not it was, there was not much difference. Zhu Qiyu lightly coughed and turned his attention to the other ministers. Sweeping his gaze around, he said, "My beloved subjects, it is time for everyone to come up with a plan for how to deal with the siege of Talu City. There were too many people in the hole, and I presume that my beloved subjects did not want to say anything. Now that there are no outsiders, we can say whatever we want behind closed doors. We will pardon all of you." Zhu Qiyu's tone was amiable, and his voice was gentle. "Yes, I was not angry when you did not express your stance. After all, there were too many people, and what if you said something wrong? But now, there is no one else here. If you have any ideas, feel free to say it. Regardless of whether it is right or wrong, you are not wrong." It was not easy for Zhu Qiyu to use such a tone. At the same time, he looked at the 6 ministers expectantly, waiting for them to come up with a plan to solve the problem. Reality disappointed him once again. The hall fell into silence again. The 6 ministers were like mutes. They lowered their heads and did not speak. It was as if there was a beautiful pattern on the ground that was worth studying. Zhu Qiyu endured it when everyone did not speak up. But now he had already said so much, but no one said a word. This was somewhat unacceptable. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in dire need of manpower and it wasn't appropriate to make a big fuss about it, he was afraid that he would have to teach these 2 people a lesson today to intimidate them. Forcibly suppressing the anger in his heart, he finally decided to listen to everyone's opinions by name. "Didn't you all say nothing? Then I will ask one by one. Let's see if you still dare to not speak." His gaze first fell on the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi. He was a big shot in charge of human resources. Since it was a war, he naturally had to choose a general first. Asking Wang Zhi was a matter of course. Naturally, when he saw Wang Zhi, Zhu Qiyu was also angry. He would not forget that this person's grandson, Wang Xijing, had learned Yang Chendong's teachings. He should be teaching at the headquarters of Yang Chendong, the place called Qiqian City. Such a person would probably be disloyal. Shaking his head, Zhu Qiyu threw these undesirable thoughts aside. Forget it. Speaking of which, all the civil and military officials in the Imperial court were once officials of the same court as Yang Chendong. Was he going to investigate them and remove them from their positions? Suppressing the anger in his heart, he looked at Wang Zhi and said, "Minister Wang, tell me your opinion." Wang Zhi, who was called, finally raised his head with a puzzled expression. When he saw that Zhu Qiyu was serious, he shook his head. "This old minister has no objections. Everything will be decided by your majesty." "No objections." Hearing Wang Zhi's reply, Zhu Qiyu was really angry. "Since you have no objections, then what are you saying?" But when he thought about it, it seemed that he was the one who forced the other party to say it. But did he really have no objections? "You are the Minister of Personnel, the so-called heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. All the officials in the world are under your control. What did you mean by saying that you have no objections?" Zhu Qiyu's expression kept changing, but it quickly returned to normal. He could actually understand Wang Zhi. Under his suspicion, it would be inappropriate for him to propose any candidate at this time. Perhaps even if he proposed a suitable candidate, he would not approve it. Since that was the case, what was the point of saying more? Just when Zhu Qiyu thought that he had thought everything through, Wang Zhi suddenly spoke again. "Your Majesty, this subject is old and has not been sleeping well recently. There are many things that I am unable to do. Therefore, I would like to resign and retire to the countryside. Your Majesty, please grant me permission." Wang Zhi actually resigned. This was somewhat out of Zhu Qiyu's expectations. Out of a conspiracy theory, he could not help but wonder if this was the other party's way of retreating. But when he thought about it, it was not very likely. After all, it was not good for one's reputation to submit one's resignation when the country was in danger. Unless such a person was no longer an official, his reputation would definitely take a hit. Who would listen to such a person's words in the future? If that was the case, this Wang Zhi really wanted to resign. Sigh. Sighing in his heart, Zhu Qiyu had already decided to agree. After all, both parties were suspicious of each other. This job was not easy to do. Since that was the case, it was better to let him leave. Sometimes, he did not reply. He could not possibly agree immediately when the other party said that he wanted to resign. Wouldn't that make others misunderstand that he wanted the other party to leave? His gaze shifted from Wang Ji to the Minister of Works, Shi Pu. Logically speaking, this was a military issue and the Minister of Works had nothing to do with it. However, the cannons and firearms that accompanied the army this time were made by the Ministry of Works. Now that the army was defeated, did that mean that the Ministry of Works did not do a good job? Chapter 1351. When Shi Pu's name was called, he immediately knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, this old subject is guilty. This old subject deserves 10,000 deaths. Zhu Qiyu frowned when he didn't even say anything. Why did Shi Pu have such an attitude? Zhu Qiyu frowned, but the other party quickly gave him an answer. Your Majesty, a 5-star military fire weapon is so powerful that it's not something we can compare with. In terms of firearms alone, we're not their match at all. Shi Pu almost cried for real. It was evident that he knew his weapon was inferior to the other parties. Speaking of which, compared to the technology and weapons brought by Yang Qindong, it would be more shocking if the Ministry of Works could produce similar products. Shi Pu was naturally aware of this point. Afraid that he would be punished for this, he took the initiative to bring it up. His kneeling caused Zhu Qiyu to lose the idea of asking him for a plan. This kind of person was already frightened by the 5-star army. Could he still rely on him to come up with any good ideas? Shaking his head, Zhu Qiyu wanted to call for another minister. But at this time, the Crown Prince's junior tutor, Grand Scholar and Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, spoke without being asked. Your Majesty, this subject believes that it will be difficult to solve the siege of Lu City. Finally, someone took the initiative to speak. Zhu Qiyu was happy in his heart. When he looked at Su Yozhen, his tone became much gentler. Beloved official Su, please continue. Yes. Su Yozhen cupped his fists with a solemn expression. Your Majesty, the bravery of the 5-star army is unimaginable. With their firearms, I'm afraid that by the time the memorial reaches the capital would have already fallen into their hands. For a city that has already been conquered, it would be useless no matter how much effort we put in. Rather than this, why not place the all-encompassing department on the front lines and increase the number of troops there while considering the matter of negotiating with the 5-star army? No tribute, no land, no reparations, no political marriages, and no titles of kings with different surnames. These were the Great Ming's strength of character. It was a pity that after the Great Ming divided the south, its strength was not as strong as before. Many rules had also changed. Let's talk about not being conferred the title of king. Where did Bugnam of Gojoseon come from? Since he had already broken the ancestral rules, what harm was there in breaking a few more? This was what Su Yozhen meant when she proposed to negotiate with the 5-star army. After saying all this, he took a step back. He knew that some things needed to be considered. The more he said before that, the more mistakes he would make. Sure enough, when Zhu Qiyu heard that they were going to negotiate with the 5-star army, her face became very ugly. An ominous glint flashed in his eyes, representing the anger in his heart. As the saying goes, if the monarch is humiliated, his subjects will die. However, when he looked at the other 5 ministers, their expressions didn't change at all. It was as if Su Yozhen's words were nothing out of the ordinary. The hall fell into silence once more, and only the sound of Zhu Qiyu's heavy breathing could be heard. Zhu Qiyu was originally an ambitious emperor. Ever since he took the position, he had been diligent in government affairs. It could be seen from the fact that he had less than 6 hours of rest every day. Unfortunately, one of the biggest lies in the world was that if you worked hard, you would succeed. This was because many people were indeed very capable, but they always lacked a bit of luck or talent. In the end, their wishes didn't come true. Zhu Qiyu belonged to the type of people who were very unlucky. Not to mention that in history, he was overturned by Zhu Qizhen. Just the fact that he met Yang Qindong in this life had already determined his fate. No matter how hard he worked, he wouldn't be able to unify the Great Ming. The result of his hard work was that Beiming would be destroyed a little later than usual. With the difficulty in front of him, Zhu Qiyu naturally didn't want to lower his head. However, reality was so cruel. The 5-star army was so powerful. If he still stubbornly insisted on going against the 5-star army, he might even lose his family fortune. He might even lose the throne. This situation was so big that he had to consider it carefully. Could he really afford to gamble? He had the heart to kill the enemy, but he was powerless to reverse the situation. This sentence was the most appropriate to describe Zhu Qiyu. When a person's strength wasn't strong, even if they were angry, they couldn't do anything. Moreover, if one wanted to achieve great things, they couldn't let their emotions affect their decisions. Thinking about Bai Ming's current situation, even if he wanted to mobilize the army, it would take time. Moreover, their fighting strength was so weak that even Zhu Qiyu didn't have confidence. In the end, after a long sigh, Zhu Qiyu's mood began to stabilize again. Su Yozhen, who had been secretly observing, saw that Zhu Qiyu's mood was gradually stabilizing. She took a small step forward and said, "Your Majesty, a little impatience spoils great plans." Su Yozhen's actions were just to give Zhu Qiyu a way out. After hearing this, Zhu Qiyu sighed and said, "That's right. Beloved official Su is right. The strength of the 5-star army isn't something we can fight against without making preparations. Since it's like this, let's talk with them. Didn't they say they wanted 1,000,000 commoners last time? Let's discuss this matter and see if it can be done." Although it was a question, the fact that Zhu Qiyu was able to say these words already proved that he approved of this proposal. Otherwise, why would he casually mention it? It had to be said that the so-called commoners in the eyes of the emperor mostly referred to the commoners that could be seen. For example, the officials in the palace hall, as well as the gentry and nobles who could submit memorials from time to time. After all, the emperor lived in the palace all year round. What was the outside world like? How were the commoners living? All of this was nothing more than hearsay, and a basic impression he got from reading the memorials. Most of the time, the so-called world peace and prosperity in the history books referred to the officials, scholars, and country gentry living a good life. As for the commoners at the bottom, at least before the establishment of China, they didn't have enough to eat and wear. Without a clear understanding of the commoners, it was impossible to understand the true pain of handing over 1,000,000 commoners. In Zhu Qiyu's eyes, all of this was just a number. It was still the same sentence. The foundation of the great Ming dynasty was still there. It was just 1,000,000 commoners at the bottom, so it was fine to pay. As long as the emperor and the officials could live well, what did this matter? Zhu Qiyu had never taken the people at the bottom seriously, and had never treated them as human beings. Only then did Zhu Qiyu casually ask this question. In that instant, the eyes of several people from the 6 ministries lit up. They knew that the time for them to speak had come. As if he was afraid that Zhu Qiyu would look down on him, the Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, who wanted to make his presence known, was the first to stand up. "Your Majesty, this matter can be discussed. However, the topic needs to be changed. This isn't because we fear Bugnam of Gojoseon and want to give them 1,000,000 commoners. Rather, under the other party's request, we want to reward Bugnam of Gojoseon with the magnanimity of the Celestial Empire." The ancient people cared a lot about face. They opened their mouths and spoke of benevolence and righteousness. It wasn't a problem to ask them to hand over 1,000,000 commoners, but if they were forced to do so, then it didn't make sense. Who knew how the history books of later generations would scold them? Even if it was for the sake of their reputation, they had to cover it up. Zhu Qiyu naturally approved of this. He didn't want the people of later generations to scold him as a fatuous ruler. As a result, he nodded and said, "That's right. Beloved official Jean is right. Then I'll leave this matter to you to discuss. Once you have the results, just report it to me. When the time comes, the Ministry of Rights can send someone to communicate with the 5-star army." I think it would be better for Minister Hu to go personally. After all, Wu Nanwang is your grandson-in-law. This subject is unwell. Please retire and return to your hometown. The Minister of Rights, Hu Ming, straightforwardly put down the board in his hand and knelt as he spoke. This was clearly a trap. To hand over 1,000,000 commoners for his own safety. This wasn't good to hear but also hard to say. With Hu Ming's shrewdness, it would be strange if he agreed to do such a thing that would go down in history for 10,000 years. Not to mention that Zhu Qiyu had deliberately pointed out his relationship with Yang Chendong. Hu Xiao was even less likely to pick up on this topic. He didn't ask for people to say that he was himself and his grandson-in-law was his grandson-in-law. However, as long as he was the one who did it, it was inevitable that others would mention it and say that he was a traitor. Hu Ming knelt on the ground and asked for his resignation. This greatly exceeded Zhu Qiyu's expectations. The Minister of Rights, Wang Ji, had already asked for his resignation and he had basically agreed. If he let Hu Ming leave now, those who didn't know would think that he wasn't tolerant. He was venting his anger on his subordinates because they had lost a battle. Zhu Qiyu was someone who cared about his reputation. His face immediately darkened and he wanted to curse. However, he knew that his deterrence towards Hu Ming was too little. He couldn't casually take him down and anger Yang Chendong, but he also couldn't remove him from his position and make Bug Nam of Gojoseon think too much. After realizing his helplessness, Zhu Qiyu could only shake his head with an ugly expression. Since beloved official whose health isn't good, you should rest at home for a while. You are a pillar of the country and cannot be left out. After your body recovers, you still have to share my burdens. I'll leave this matter to the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Huang Chang, to handle. Zhu Qiyu backed down. In the end, he still didn't have the guts to remove Hu Ming from his position. This was enough to prove that he was very afraid of Yang Chendong. This old subject thanks your majesty. After receiving benefits, Hu Ming expressed his thanks and stood up. Then he turned and strode away. Although he was old, he didn't seem to be feeling unwell at all. After Hu Ming left, he didn't even have the intention to discuss the matter. It was clear that he wouldn't participate in this matter. This was to avoid suspicion. However, in reality, how could he not want to avoid the matter being discussed? That was millions of commoners. If he handed them over, it would cause a lot of discussion. He definitely wouldn't do something that would damage his reputation. Chapter 1352. As soon as Hu Shao left, Wang Ji also strode after him. He had just asked to resign, and from the looks of it, Zhu Qiyu had already agreed. Right now, he only needed to go home and prepare his things. He would not step into this trap. The remaining 4 ministers looked at each other, but in the end, they did not say anything. Since they did not have the courage to resign, they had to face some things that they had to face. Zhu Qiyu left the 6 ministers behind. That night, the news reached the ears of the ministers. In accordance with Bug Nam of Gojoseon's wishes, Bai Ming wanted to negotiate with him. At the same time, the news of Hu Shao recuperating at home and Wang Ji resigning also spread. The left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Huang Cheng, was temporarily in charge of the Ministry of Rights. The left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, He Wan Yuan, was in charge of the evaluation and appointment of all the ministers. When the news came out, the houses of the 2 ministers were filled with people and carriages. Countless officials used all sorts of reasons to congratulate them or reminisce about the past. It gave people the feeling that there was no danger at the border. From this, it could be seen that Bai Ming's foundation had already been shaken. On the morning of the second day, one minister and the other temporarily in charge of the Ministry of Rights, Huang Cheng, and He Wan Yuan, came to the palace to express their thanks. What they saw was indeed Zhu Qiyu's cold face. It was because the embroidered uniform guards had sent over information. According to them, Bai Ming's 400,000 soldiers were in danger. Even the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry led by Fang Dingshan had been injured by the 5-star army. They had either been killed or captured. This was like a bolt from the blue that smashed into Zhu Qiyu's head, completely destroying his dreams. At the same time, it was like a heavy stone had smashed into the heads of the ministers, making them recognize reality. The 5-star army is actually this powerful? After the Minister of War, Yi Ming, heard the news, he stood in place as if he had been petrified. A newly appointed minister, a minister in charge of carrying out the duties of a minister, had encountered such a thing on his first day. His expression was also extremely ugly. They did not even have time to flatter the emperor. Instead, they discussed the matter of negotiating with the 5-star army with the other 4 ministers. This time, there was also the Imperial censor of the left, Chen Yi. The censor represented the Imperial censor. This matter was of great importance. In order to reduce the number of accusations and scoldings, Chen Zhao had to participate. Of course, this didn't stop people from poking at their backs. After all, some people made a living doing this. They could hear about things and impeach anyone they didn't like. Sometimes even the emperor was their target. They would often say that the emperor was immoral, that he needed to wake up 3 times, or that he had already committed a crime. Baiming didn't have much time left, so he had to quickly come up with a countermeasure. It could be seen that they had no choice but to agree to Yang Chendong's request in a hurry. However, the migration of millions of people was not a small matter, and preparations had to be made. As for the mastermind, Yang Chendong, he had indeed left Origin City long ago. After more than a month, he had arrived at Haiphong City in Yunnan Province. Haiphong City was a seaside city that belonged to the Vietnam province. With the continuous expansion of the 5-Star Army's navy and the destruction of the nearby countries and forces, it had become an important port for the 5-Star Army's navy. For example, the people of other races from the Vietnam province who had come to support other places would board the ships here and be sent to different places. Yang Chendong's ship also stopped here. The person in charge of receiving them was the commander of the 2nd Sea Division, Zhao Chongwang. This time, they stopped at Haiphong City to replenish their food supplies. Unexpectedly, after the ship stopped, Yang Chendong disembarked with 500 black cavalry soldiers. He said that he wanted to investigate the situation of the people. Over the years, Yang Chendong's main focus was on expanding the territory. He only had a simple understanding of the destroyed countries and occupied territories from some memorials and local reports. Without investigation, there was no right to speak. It wasn't that Yang Chendong didn't trust his officials, but he was worried about the situation below. Sometimes, even the officials he appointed would be fooled by the people below. Wasn't there a saying among the people? The king of hell was easy to see, but the little devils were hard to deal with. Often, the performance of the lowest-level officials was the most important thing to the lives of the people. He didn't say anything to anyone. Even Zhao Chongwang left with the main ship under his orders. Only Shen Xing was left with the ship at the port, ready to set off at any time. Yang Chendong, on the other hand, changed into a set of green robes. He brought the Black Rider Dragon Guards, who were also wearing commoner clothes, ashore and headed towards the nearby fields. Haiphong City was under the jurisdiction of Chu-Yi City, and Yang Chendong placed the first target of his investigation here. In a restaurant on Dong An Street in the city, Yang Chendong found a seat by the window. The restaurant's location was not bad, and the view was good. More importantly, it was very lively, and there were all kinds of people. Often, it was this kind of person's personal attitude expressed by their words and actions that was the most authentic. He ordered a pot of wine, 1 meat and 1 vegetable. On his left was Beta Persei, and on his right was Chiu Vi. Yang Chendong sat there and listened to the discussions of the people at the next table with great interest. Because of Yang Bao, the people of the country were no longer ignorant people who only looked up at the sky and looked down at the ground. They had a better understanding of the outside world, and they had begun to learn how to discuss national affairs. This was just like the capital of the future. Anyone who was found could give some opinions on national policies and national affairs. It gave people the feeling that if they were to become officials, they would definitely do better than others. There were many such people in the restaurant. Through their mouths, they already knew that the 5-Star Army had won the battle in the first city, and that they had surrounded and captured 400,000 Baiming soldiers. Even the 5-Star Army had asked Baiming to provide 1 million Han Chinese people. A young man who was dressed very ordinarily, but had a good spirit and appearance, took a sip of warm wine at this time and began to talk loudly. Bugnam of Gojoseon is wise. After winning the battle, he doesn't want the land. He only wants the people. This seems to benefit the Imperial court of Baiming, but in fact, without the population, how long can Baiming last? This is like boiling a frog in warm water. Before long, without the people, Baiming will not have any chance to fight back. When the time is ripe, isn't it easy to take them down? As soon as this person spoke, Yang Chendong, who was sitting there, was stunned. He really didn't expect that there would be such a genius among the people. He actually analyzed the matter so thoroughly. He couldn't help but look at him in a new light. All right, this brother of yours just read the recent Yang report, and that's why he said this. Speaking of which, you didn't see this. It's just what the Yang report said. Another dark-skinned man with a stronger body retorted. His Chinese was not very standard, but it was enough to let people understand what he wanted to say. Just now, Yang Chendong was still shocked by this person's clear thinking. Now, after hearing this, he realized that this was not this person's idea, but a public report in the Yang report. Then he smiled and sighed in his heart. Good, this Yang report did a good job. He opened up the wisdom of the people. Don't think that the people who don't know the reason are the best and the most obedient. In fact, this is not beneficial to a country at all. Other than being useful to corrupt officials, it is useless to a country. If the people don't have a sense of ownership, how can they love a country? For thousands of years, how many people faced the change of dynasties and didn't have many thoughts at all? In their eyes, no matter who became the emperor, they were still ordinary people. As long as they could eat their fill and wear warm clothes, it was the same no matter who the emperor was. This was the drawback of not having the spirit of a master. Often there were a lot of people like this. They had no beliefs, no goals, and no understanding of the outside world. Once someone stood out and urged them to rebel, they would be easily fooled without knowing the truth. With the wisdom of the people, things would be different. They would have their own judgment. Once something happened, they would be able to analyze it in their own way. In the face of such smart people, it would be even more difficult to make use of them. In the restaurant, everyone laughed. The man who spoke first didn't get angry because he was exposed. Instead, he said with conviction, "It's true that what Yang Bao said just now was true. However, I agree with him and can use him. What can you do about it?" "Haha, there's nothing we can do about it. You are so wise and powerful." The others laughed loudly and said. The atmosphere in the restaurant was good. Obviously, many people were excited because they could participate in the discussion of the country's affairs. It seemed that this could prove that they were useful people. They were no longer muddle-headed people who didn't know what the outside world was and didn't know what to do tomorrow. Yang Chendong waited for half an hour. He saw groups of people leave and groups of people come. From their mouths, he heard many things about Itsu City and even Vietnam. There were all kinds of big and small things. For example, someone in the East City got married. Someone in the West City got a military merit because his son joined the 5-star army. Not long ago, the local Vietnamese auxiliary soldiers beat gongs and drums and sent a certificate of merit and rice noodles. Old Wang in the South City had a better harvest this year than anyone else. He was already named as an agricultural pioneer and so on. Naturally, there were also some minor officials who were sued because they overcharged a merchant or a commoner. They were arrested and sent to the Yamen. There were also people who shouted that Governor Luan was a wise man. From these trivial matters, Yang Chendong's expression had always been good. It was said that one could see the whole leopard from a single spot and see the overall situation from a corner. Just from the information obtained in the restaurant, it could be seen that the entire Itsu city was still very good. At least, Yang Chendong was satisfied. Although there were some small flaws, such as some minor officials who did not abide by the law, this was unavoidable. Chapter 1353. The human heart was like this. There were always some people whose desires began to expand after they gained power. Often, such people could not be seen before they got to the top. Sometimes the human heart had to be tested to know. Let's go and take a look at the fields. It was now the end of September, the time of harvest. Yang Chendong wanted to personally take a look at the fields and understand the first-hand details. Yang Chendong got up and left. Beta Persei put down a few Han coins on the table and left with Chiu V. Not far away, hundreds of black cavalry in different clothes also got up and kept a certain distance from the center of the city to the South City. Yang Chendong just heard that Old Wang in the South City planted well and had a great harvest. He wanted to see the results of this harvest. Compared to the prosperity and satisfaction of the people in the city, the outside of the South City was a busy scene. On the cultivated fields, there were countless small black dots busily digging. Countless sweet potatoes were dug out from the ground one by one and sent to the prepared bamboo baskets at the side. After asking around casually, he found Old Wang's place. Yang Chendong walked closer and found that the sweet potatoes of this family were bigger and fuller than the other neighbors. Haha, this must be Brother Wang. This year's harvest is good. Yang Chendong walked closer with a smile on his face. Although he was wearing a green robe, his temperament could not be changed. Farmer Old Wang could feel it at first glance when he saw Yang Chendong. His expression became more respectful and said, "I don't dare to be called Brother Wang. Just call me Old Wang. But I wonder who this gentleman is. Oh, I'm just a passerby. I heard that the harvest here is good, so I came to take a look. Haha, how is it? This year's harvest is good. The days should be better than the previous years. Of course, Yang Chendong would not reveal his identity. He chuckled and squatted down. He came to the ground and put his hand into the soil. Not long after, a huge sweet potato was dug out by him. Yang Chendong's movements were still very standard. It was not an exaggeration to say that he looked like a professional. After all, he had done this kind of farm work in the early days of the Yang family village. He was the one who dug out the earliest potatoes, so he naturally had his own experience. When an expert made a move, one would know whether or not he was an expert. When Yang Chendong did this, Lao Wang laughed. I didn't expect this mister to be an expert as well, hee. This smile instantly brought the relationship between the two of them closer. When they started to talk, they naturally became much more casual. Old Wang was a talkative person. It didn't take long for Yang Chendong to learn a lot of things from him. For example, the reason why his family's land had a better harvest and higher output was because he was more willing to use fertilizer. Compared to other people, his family also raised a lot of poultry, such as chickens, ducks, geese, porpoises, pigs, and so on. Using their feces on the ground could make the soil more fertile, so the yield would naturally be higher than other people's. Not only that, once the grain was harvested, in order to prevent the grain from being cheap and harming the farmers, he could also use the surplus grain to feed the poultry. Then, he could sell the meat to increase his income, allowing him to live a better life. Wasn't this the cycle of the food chain? Could it be called reasonable utilization? After Yang Chendong heard this, he asked with a surprised expression, Lao Wang, how did you think of these things? You are really smart. I am a person who does not eat a single word. How could I have such a brain? This was all said by our provincial governor Xiao Wan. These things were also recorded in the Yang report. It was just that other people were suspicious. The old man was honest and felt that it was feasible, so he did it. Thus, this year, the output of the land was much higher than others, and the meat was also sold at a high price. However, next year, the other farmers will follow suit. This way, the price of meat and grain will drop a little. However, this is already very good. To think that I, Lao Wang, have lived for close to 50 years. When have I ever lived like this? In the past, I had to thank the heavens for being able to eat my fill. Once there was a famine, I had to go out early to beg for food. Now that I think about it, those days were really not for humans. Lao Wang was still sighing and saying something, but Yang Chendong could no longer hear him. His thoughts had already landed on the sentence that he just said, the price of meat and grain will drop a little next year. There was a saying that said prosperity. The common people suffered. Death. The common people suffered. This not only meant that the people who started the war were the common people, but it also meant that when there was a harvest, the people who suffered were still the common people. Because once there was a harvest, the grain would face the problem of having too much. As the saying goes, the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Anything, once there was too much of it, it would no longer be valuable. Thus, sometimes, a harvest would instead become a small disaster. In this way, it would definitely affect the enthusiasm of the common people. If they did not work hard to farm in the coming year, what would they do when there was a famine? Without enough grain, it was inevitable that people would starve to death. This was something that Yang Chendong absolutely could not allow to happen. If he wanted to solve this problem, he had to think of a way. Yang Chendong thought of a phrase in his heart, protection price. Yes, protection price. It referred to the lowest standard price for each crop. If they sold at this price, the common people would not earn much, but they would definitely not lose out. In this way, no matter what kind of harvest it was, the common people would not have to worry about not being able to sell their grain. This way, their enthusiasm would become higher and higher, and the grain produced would naturally increase. As for how to deal with the grain that was bought at the protection price, if it were someone else, they might have a headache, but Yang Chendong did not need to worry. The current Xianxia's territory was so large that it was unimaginable. It was far beyond the ancients. With such a large territory, it was impossible to have a harvest everywhere. He could transfer grain from the south to the north or from the north to the south. In this way, no matter where there was a famine, he would not have to worry about it. He could use the grain to adjust. Besides, he could also sell the surplus grain to other forces and countries that did not belong to Xianxia. This was especially true for some small countries that did not have much history. They had never had enough grain to eat. As long as the price was reasonable, everything would not be a problem. Since he thought of the protection price, Yang Qindong felt that it was necessary to carry out this matter immediately. Now was the time for a harvest. He could not hurt the common people because of too much grain. Beta Persei. Send someone to inform the Chu-Yi city's government office. Tell them that I'm here. Since the matter was almost understood, Yang Qindong did not need to hide his identity. He also wanted to see the officials here and give them some encouragement. After all, the development here was still very good. The news of Bugnam of Gojoseon's appearance in Chu-Yi city quickly spread. After the local officials heard it, they all opened their mouths wide in disbelief. Speaking of which, they were just the managers of a small town. At best, they were just a 7th-grade county magistrate. Now that they were going to meet the so-called emperor, who would not be nervous? Fortunately, Yuan Chunqing, one of the 3 generals of Vietnam province, was training troops near Chu-Yi city. First of all, Chu-Yi city was a coastal town. There was an army stationed here. Once there was any danger, they could be the first-line soldiers to block and buy time for the main army to arrive. Second, the Vietnamese auxiliary soldiers could also help the nearby farmers to harvest crops. In coastal cities, hurricanes could appear at any time. With them there, some unpredictable losses could be reduced. Yuan Chunqing had seen Yang Qindong before. However, at that time, Yang Qindong's status was far from as noble as it was now. When he heard that Bugnam of Gojoseon had appeared in his territory, Yuan Chunqing tidied up his clothes and said to the bodyguard beside him, "Immediately inform Governor Luan of this news. Be quick." At this time, the security of Chu-Yi city's government office had been taken over by the Black Cavalry. They had changed back to their military uniforms and were wearing black armor and black helmets. Only their mouths, noses, and eyes were exposed. With just a glance, a murderous aura rushed over, causing many officials who had not been on the battlefield to be nervous and shocked. As Vietnam province, which was only a province of Xianxia, the officials here were not all Han people. Among them, a small number of them were from foreign races. These non-human beings were all literate and knowledgeable. Their appearance greatly alleviated the lack of Han officials. It was also because of the existence of these people that the various government offices were able to operate quickly. Once there were any new policies, they would be able to be transmitted to the ears of the people in time. Of course, Yang Qindong had never truly believed in the foreign races. Thus, these people did not occupy any important positions. Not only that, they would also be like the Han officials, adopting the system of transferring officials. That was to say, they could only stay in one place for a maximum of 4 years. After 4 years, they would definitely change places. This could prevent them from joining forces to the greatest extent. Yang Qindong's sudden appearance caused the officials to be surprised and excited. They were excited and somewhat afraid. After all, Yang Qindong had led the 5-star army to expand the territory and killed countless people. Often, wherever the army passed by, countless statues would be erected. Thinking about the scene of those dead people's heads being placed together, only a few people could not help but tremble. After meeting the officials one by one, Yang Qindong smiled and praised them, causing each of the officials to feel as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. Yuan Chunqing, who was at the side, also helped to introduce the names of the officials, their positions, what they were in charge of, their contributions, and so on. This also allowed Yang Qindong to have a more intuitive understanding. After meeting the officials, and at Yang Qindong's request, Yuan Chunqing found the person in charge of Chu-Yi City's Yang newspaper, the so-called reporters, representatives of merchants, representatives of farmers, as well as representatives of the handmade industry and some small factories. Chapter 1354. For 3 whole days, Yang Qindong met with people from all walks of life. He got first-hand information, and through talking with these people, he had a deeper understanding of the situation in Yunnan province. On the night of the 3rd day, the travel-worn Governor Luan Shaochen finally arrived at Chu-Yi City and came in front of Yang Qindong. 4 years ago, Lin Qindong ordered the governors to be replaced. Luan Shaochen was transferred from the governor of Laos to the governor of Yunnan province. Although he was called Governor Luan, He was not young, 28 years old. When he first took office, he was only 19 years old. Now that 9 years had passed, the facts had proven that Yang Chendong was right to let his brother-in-law take the position despite the objections of the masses. Just from the results, Yunnan province had always been in the first place, far better than the surrounding provinces such as Laos. Just from this point, it was enough to prove that Luan Xiaoqin's ability was reassuring. Sixth young master. After seeing Yang Chendong, tears flowed down from Luan Xiaoqin's eyes. It was true that he was the governor of Yunnan province, and it seemed that he had a high position and power, equivalent to the master of a force, but he had never had such an awareness in his heart. In his eyes, he was just an official under Yang Chendong. He came to Yunnan province only to start working, in order to better repay Yang Chendong's kindness to the Luan family. Fortunately, his performance did not disappoint, and he did it to make Yang Chendong satisfied. Good. Yang Chendong also sighed and stood up, shaking hands with Luan Xiaoqin. He was naturally very satisfied with his brother-in-law, and the other party's achievements also made him proud. But when he saw the real person, he couldn't help but sigh. The other party's chin had a thick layer of beard. The other party was almost 30 years old, and he was left in Yunnan province for 9 years. He didn't have time to reunite with his family, nor did he have time to mourn for his parents. Speaking of which, he felt sorry for the other party. The two of them held hands and walked down together. Yang Chendong opened his mouth and said, "You've done well. The current development of the Vietnamese province has greatly exceeded my expectations. You've also completed your task well. How about it? Have you thought about changing places?" According to the requirements of the transfer system, the officials would change places every 4 years. It was just that considering that the change of a province's governor would cause a lot of trouble, this system was not implemented so seriously. But in order to prevent the situation from happening, Yang Chendong still decided to change the governor who had been in office for more than 4 years. Just to form a kind of routine, this time he asked for Luan Xiaoqin's opinion. When he heard that he wanted to change places, Luan Xiaoqin's eyes lit up first, and then he shook his head. "Sixth young master, although I have done a lot of things here, it is not perfect. There are still some things that have not been completely solved. I want to work for a few more years to solve these problems. There are endless things to be done." Yang Chendong shook his head and said, "You have solved the problem in Yunnan province very well. The next thing will be handed over to others to do. You have to give others a chance to practice. As for you, you should go to a higher position to learn, so that you can take on more important responsibilities in the future." This meant that he was going to put an important position in an important position. Luan Xiaoqin was naturally grateful. "Okay, I will listen to the sixth young master." That's it. In this way, you will be ready to hand over the work in the near future, and there will naturally be someone to replace your position. This time, I asked you to come over mainly to listen to your report on the situation in Yunnan province, and also to discuss with you the issue of the protection price of food. Of course, you can put forward your own opinions on the issue of agricultural tax and commercial tax. It was already very late at night, but the candles in the study room did not go out. They burned until dawn of the next day. After the two of them had breakfast together, under Yang Chendong's satisfied gaze, Luan Xiaoqin led a group of Yunnan province officials to send him to Haiphong City. Luan Xiaoqin watched as Yang Chendong boarded the warship and went straight to Xianxia City. Xianxia City. It was no longer a small seaside city. After more than 10 years of continuous construction, it looked like a modern city. Compared to the straight cement road, there was a street lamp every 50 meters. Within a mile, one could definitely see a small park. There were rows of green trees on both sides of the road. Walking here, breathing in the sufficient oxygen emitted by the green plants gave people a feeling of relaxation and relaxation. In the city, there were orderly small districts one after another, and tall buildings made of cement and steel were connected to each other. They used the smallest area to meet the residential needs of more people. Every district had a large square. At night, there were people dancing, playing, and selling all kinds of snacks and goods. Compared to the dark outside, this place was like heaven. The only imperfection was the hundreds of tall chimneys in Xianxia City. They would occasionally emit black smoke during the day, affecting the spatial state of the entire city. Fortunately, the city lord's mansion had already paid attention to this problem, and had already considered moving the factories under the chimneys out, and building new factories in the suburbs. With the appearance of the rubber trees, there were many carriages and rickshaws on the straight cement road in the city. From time to time, one could also see some streets being paved with tracks. According to the well-informed people, track chain cars had been successfully researched, and would soon appear in the entire city and be used on a large scale. At that time, it would greatly increase the speed of people's travel. Everything developed in an orderly manner. Several warships arrived at the new dock at dawn. Then, rows of cold vanguard soldiers completely sealed off the dock. A group of generals with gold beans on their shoulder plates lined up in an orderly manner and looked respectfully at the warships approaching the dock. Under the gazes of the deputy commander of the army, Lang Feng, the deputy commander of the navy, Gao Xiong, and a group of high-ranking officers, Yang Chendong, who was still dressed in a green robe, walked out of the cabin under the protection of a group of black cavalry. He saw the group of high-ranking military officers who had come to welcome him. This time, when Yang Chendong returned, he only informed the upper echelons of the army. Whether it was City Lord Yu Qian or the ladies in the palace, he did not send any news. He did not want to affect these people because of his arrival. As for the people in the army, he had to inform them even if he didn't want to. After all, the warships in charge of transporting him were the Navy's warships. Presumably, all the news had already been registered in the Navy's headquarters. Sixth Young Master. Lang Feng and Gao Xiong took the lead and walked forward, giving a standard military salute. Yang Chendong first returned a military salute, then smiled and reached out to pat the two on the shoulder. Thank you for your hard work. Sixth Young Master, you've worked hard. Perhaps it was because they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but both Lang Feng and Gao Xiong had a trace of restraint on their faces. As Xianxia's territory grew bigger and bigger, Yang Chendong's status also rose. It wasn't the time when he couldn't play without a certain someone. Yang Chendong still had a lot of feelings for these veterans who had followed him since the beginning. He looked at the two with a gentle gaze and said, "This time, I'll be staying for a few months. I'll go to your headquarters to take a look. You just have to be prepared. For now, you guys can go back first. I'll go take a look at the City Lord's mansion, then return to the palace." In the early morning of the City Lord's mansion, from afar, one could see a few electric lights lit up. Needless to say, those must be the workers who had worked all night without rest. Compared to the army, which was divided into the navy and army, the local government was completely controlled by the City Lord's mansion. Every policy issued from here could affect millions or even tens of millions of people. Therefore, every order had to be carefully considered and considered carefully before it was issued. Yu Qian worked overtime again. He only slept for a while when the sun was about to rise. Just now, the guards brought hot water over. After washing up, he sat down in the spacious and bright office and began to work. Piles of documents that needed to be approved were piled up beside his desk. Xianxia's territory and power grew bigger and bigger. Every day, Yu Qian had to deal with more and more official documents. Knowing that his responsibilities were heavy, Yu Qian never dared to slack off. Even during the new year, he only rested for a day. As for the usual holidays, there was no such thing. This was not a hard and fast rule, but Yu Qian took the initiative to request to work overtime. He seemed to always have so much energy, like an old bull that did not know what fatigue was, working hard. This is the document sent by the Wei province. It contains the amount of food that has increased in their provincial warehouse this year. Take out the document from last month and compare it. Yu Qian did not even raise his head as he instructed. However, he did not know that the person standing in front of him was not his secretary or guards, but the leader of Xianxia, the most important person, Yang Chendong. After speaking, Yu Qian still buried his head in the document in his hand. From time to time, he would lower his head and write something. After a while, when he felt that the shadow in front of him did not leave, he still did not raise his head and said, "Why don't you go? Can't you find it? Didn't I say? The documents of each province have to be filed separately. Go and look for it properly." After saying all this, Yu Qian still buried his head in his work. However, he quickly noticed something and his face showed displeasure. Although he rarely lost his temper at the staff around him, when it came to work, he still dared to scold them. Yu Qian raised his head with a displeased expression and wanted to criticize her. When he raised his head, Yang Chendong's appearance entered his eyes. Although they hadn't seen each other for 2 years, This didn't prevent Yu Qian from recognizing Yang Qindong in the first place. Chapter 1355. The person standing in front of him was actually Yang Qindong. Yu Qian didn't seem to be able to react as he was stunned for a moment. Then, he remembered that the battle report said that Yang Qindong would be returning to Tsuxian City for the new year. He immediately got up and said, "Greetings to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Mr. Yu, you don't have to be like this. Quickly get up." Yang Qindong quickly reached out and helped Yu Qian up. Then he looked touched. Wars were fought for money and stability at the rear. The reason why the five-star army was able to win so many battles was because of Yu Qian, who stabilized the situation at the back. If it had to be said, it would be like the lyrics of the song, "Half of the military metal is mine, half of it is yours." The muscles on Yu Qian's face kept trembling as he was supported by Yang Qindong. His grip on Yang Qindong's hands tightened. "Wunan King you guys fought well." Yu Qian grew up in Great Ming and was used to seeing the people of Great Ming being bullied by other races, especially by the Walla and Tatars. The Great Ming dynasty could only defend and couldn't fight back at all. Yu Qian had once felt sad about this. The so-called Celestial Empire, the so-called 10,000 nations, those were just superficial appearances. It was hard to say when the flames of war would start again. The only thing the Great Ming dynasty could do was to defend the cities. As for the common people outside the cities, they would be bullied, robbed, and even killed. Their money would be stolen, and their houses would be burned down. These were all normal occurrences. Even if the news spread to the Imperial court, the officials wouldn't just sigh with the emperor. Other than opening the granary and releasing grain, what else could they do? What could they do? What did they dare to do? Yu Qian was once an official in the Imperial court. He was angry about this and fought for it. However, when he saw the treasury's silver and grain recorded in the Ministry of Revenue, there was only silence. The country was too poor and couldn't afford to fight any big or fierce battles. Not to mention the Mongolian cavalry in the vast grasslands. Even if you could defeat them, what would you gain? Those nomads were so poor that they didn't even have an iron pot. What was the point of winning? When the cost and the benefits could not be proportional, sending troops to the grassland would become a slogan and a great challenge for the future generations. Like the stars and the moon in the sky, they could only look at them but could not reach them. Yu Qian even thought that if this continued, sooner or later, the Great Ming dynasty would be destroyed in the hands of these grassland wolves. Just like how Yuan defeated Song, who could defeat Ming? Every time he thought of this matter and looked at the lives of the other courtiers, they did not have to worry about food or clothing. All they did every day was fight for power and profit. This made him deeply disappointed. He could not see any hope, nor did he know if this problem could be solved by his descendants. Now, Yang Qindong's sudden appearance had solved the problem that he thought was impossible to solve. The five-star army not only defeated the grassland wolves that the Great Ming dynasty's people feared, but they also occupied the grassland, built a city, opened up wastelands, and developed businesses. This allowed countless Han people to live a worry-free life. Even the status of the Han people had been raised. Looking at it now, which of the people under Xianxia's influence did not feel proud to be a Han person? Yang Qindong had done all these things that they did not dare to think about. As someone with a strong sense of national pride, how could Yu Qian not be grateful? No one was more touched than him about the improvement in the lives of the Han people. After all, he was in contact with this kind of work every day and received detailed data from the various provinces. In Yu Qian's eyes, Yang Qindong was like the savior of the Han people. Now that he saw Yang Qindong, he only wanted to kneel down and kowtow to him on behalf of the tens of thousands of Han people to thank him for his kindness. Yang Qindong noticed Yu Qian's excitement and was affected by it. He couldn't help but say, "Mr. Yu, this is the result of our joint efforts. We fought well because of your logistical support at the rear." No, how can our achievements be compared to those warriors who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy?" Yu Qian said modestly, but these were also his heartfelt words. Yu Qian did not sit on the office chair, and Yang Qindong naturally did not sit there either. The two of them found a sofa and sat down. Then, they talked about Xianxia's situation. This conversation lasted for more than 2 hours until Beta Persei could not help but remind them, "Young master, it's time to eat." "Oh look, I'm hungry." "Haha, come, bring the food here." Yang Qindong chuckled. Yang Chendong and Yu Qian talked about a lot of things for the entire morning and afternoon. They talked about the protection price of food, the specific division of business tax, and the appointment of some provincial and county officials, as well as the economic growth data. The two of them talked about whatever came to mind. In the end, Yang Chendong said, "Mr. Yu, the people are the foundation of the people. As long as the people are stable, the country will be stable. So, this prince does not want to increase taxes. What do you think? Never increase taxes. What a good benevolent government. Who mentioned the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors? Who said that during the spring and autumn period? This was a true benevolent ruler. The first person in history to do such a thing was Kong Pockmarked, who built slaves. He created a prosperous era of Kong and Qian. It had to be said that Kong Pockmarked was very good at bluffing people. Later on, Master Jin and countless Manchurian remnants thought that this was a concrete manifestation of Kong Pockmarked's benevolent government. And now, Yang Chendong appeared here. Naturally, this person had nothing to do with it. He became the first person to propose never increasing taxes. Although he was not an emperor, he was better than an emperor, or even better than an emperor. Since he said never to increase taxes, then he would definitely never increase taxes. Hearing this, Yu Qian's body trembled. His heart was filled with joy. After about a few breaths, he actually knelt in front of Yang Chendong. He bowed and said, "I, on behalf of the millions of people, thank Bugnam of Gojoseon for his benevolent government." Benevolent government. Good, Mr. Yu, quickly get up, quickly get up. Seeing Yu Qian so excited, Yang Chendong quickly reached out and helped him up. Then he sighed. Even a great talent like Yu Qian was so excited when he heard that the taxes would never be increased. One could imagine what the people would be like when they knew. And the so-called never increase taxes meant that taxes would never increase. The specific meaning was that the tax amount of ding-yin would be fixed, and there would be no increase in taxes. The governors of the provinces would always use the ding-yin as a fixed amount, and there would be no increase or decrease. The new ding-yin would not be counted as ding-yin, and households with more than 1 ding-yin would only have to pay 1 ding-yin. Of course, taxes were different. Originally, Xianxia did not place much importance on taxes. Even when they needed to use the people, they would still give them money. It was just that it was not much. But after all, this was Yang Chendong's matter. In other words, if one day he was no longer here, would taxes rise again? And now, after Yang Chendong shouted out the slogan of never increasing taxes, the people under Xianxia could be at peace. Because this meant that in the future, Yang Chendong's descendants would also have to respect this decision. This sentence would also become a rule that would be enforced forever. In other words, this could become an ancestral rule of Xianxia. In Xianxia, Yang Chendong was equivalent to an ancestor. This was the difference between him and the ruler of a city. This was also one of the important reasons why in Xianxia's territory, any policy could be implemented smoothly. For example, whether it was the Southern Ming or Bai Ming, if they wanted to make a new policy, they would have to bring benefits to the nobles and the country gentry. Once the new policy harmed the interests of the other party, it would inevitably be met with great resistance. This was also the reason why, apart from Xiangyang's reform, the other reforms had all failed. Their actions harmed the interests of some people, so naturally, there would be many people who opposed it. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to implement it. This was also why the Great Ming had no lack of insightful people, but many good policies could not be implemented. However, in Yang Chendong's case, this was not a problem. He was the ancestor of Xianxia. Whether it was the local government or the military, he was the core. In addition, under the efforts of Xianxia's propaganda department, he had long become a legend. Every word of such a person was like the truth. Who would dare to stop him? Who would be able to stop him? It was just like never increasing taxes. Perhaps if it was someone else who did it, they would have to face all kinds of problems. However, this did not happen to Yang Chendong. Yu Qian had seen the key point, which was why he was so excited. Yang Chendong was also very happy. He was happy to receive Yu Qian's praise. With his support, this work was much easier to do. All right, Mr. Yu, this matter is settled. Later, draft the work in this king's name. Also, please consider the price of food. The standard cannot be too high, nor too low. In short, The interests of the people must be the priority. Yang Qindong knew that it was time to leave. Presumably, the news of his return to Crimson City had already spread. His wives in the palace must be very anxious, especially his 2 children. He missed them very much. After not seeing them for 2 years, he did not know how tall they had grown. In the end, Yang Qindong still left the city lord's mansion. Then, the group of people went straight to the palace. This time, they did not ride a horse. Instead, they sat in a carriage. Considering the problem of hygiene in the city, unless the situation was urgent, no one was allowed to casually ride a horse on the streets. In the carriage with rubber tires and shock absorbers, Yang Qindong sat on the comfortable sofa, feeling very comfortable. Looking out the window made of glass and watching the beautiful scenery flash before his eyes, he felt a little excited. Chapter 1356. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was homesick. His wife and children were in the palace. In some ways this was his home. At the entrance of the palace, there was a line of children wearing special military uniforms standing in a row. They held wooden swords in their hands and were dressed in military uniforms. From afar, they looked like they were standing in a neat row. Princess Xianxia, who was already 5 years old, was standing at the front of the line. She wore a female military uniform with her head held high and her chest puffed out. Wearing a small beret, she looked like a female general and was very eye-catching. Beside Xianxia stood Yang Bo, who was less than 3 years old. As Yang Qindong's eldest son, he was likely to inherit the throne in the future. At this time, he was also wearing a special military uniform. Because of the rich nutrition, he gave off a strong and dignified feeling. The only difference between him and his sister was that he seemed to be unable to stand still. His eyes would occasionally look at the road in the distance, as if he was waiting for something. The heir and princess came out together. The only person who could make them wait was naturally their father, Yang Qindong. Yang Bo didn't have much of an impression of Yang Qindong. After all, his father left him when he was very young. Most of his impressions of Yang Qindong came from the mouths of others. From the mouths of others. His father seemed to be omnipotent and capable of anything. Children all worship heroes. Yang Bowie was extremely proud to have such a father. Every time he heard others talk about his father, he would involuntarily puff out his chest. It was as if he was saying to others, "Come, praise my father. I am his eldest son." Under his pride, Yang Bo had more than once thought about what he would look like when he saw his father and how he would perform. But when he really saw Yang Qindong, he became a little afraid. He didn't know if his father would like him. If he didn't, then what would he do? Don't look around. Father will come back at any time. You have to perform well. Yang Jie whispered when she noticed her brother's absent-minded look. Okay. Yang Bo nodded in agreement. But this was only because his sister was usually too dignified. In fact, his worries did not disappear. Instead, he took the opportunity to ask softly, "Sister, do you think Imperial father will like me?" "Yes, we are all father's good children. Anyway, father used to like me very much. I think he will like you too." Of course, little Yang Jie didn't dare to be too sure, so she had to use herself as an example. Little Yang Bo nodded his head again and replied in a half-understanding manner. The group of children was still waiting quietly. Those who could enter this team were not children of ordinary families. For example, there were Tiger's Mane's son and daughter, Beta Persei's son, Yang San's son and daughter, and so on. There were also people like Yu Mian's son, who was also Yu Qian's grandson. Their loyalty was unquestionable, and they would grow up together. It could be imagined that these people would most likely become Yang Bo's people in the future, and they would also be the most trustworthy group of people. They were still waiting. After lunch, the team began to gather here. In the words of little Yang Jia, who was the leader of the children, they wanted to welcome Imperial father in their best state. They wanted him to see that although they were very young, they could also protect their home like adults and become great talents. Little Yang Jia even publicly said more than once that she wanted to be a female general in the future, lead troops to war, and expand Xianxia's territory. Under the guidance of little Yang Jia, these little friends also had the same idea. They were also fantasizing about one day riding a warhorse and killing in all directions, becoming heroes. The waiting time always felt very long. Fortunately, Yang Qindong's carriage finally appeared. From afar, when a group of carriages came towards the palace and the guards near the palace stood upright and saluted, the children knew that it must be Bugnam of Gojoseon. Sitting in the carriage, Yang Qindong saw the scene of children standing in a row in front of the palace through the transparent glass from afar. At this moment, Yang Wu, who was in charge of welcoming Yang Qindong, sat beside him. "Young master, it's the princess and the prince. They are standing in line to welcome the arrival of the young master." Upon hearing that his daughter and son were in the group, Yang Qindong let go of all his reservations and said loudly, "Isn't this nonsense? It's still very hot at noon today. Who told them to stand here and wait for me? Hurry, speed up, let's hurry over." After the coachman received the order, he immediately cracked the whip and moved forward. Amidst the cracking of the whip, the speed of the carriage increased by a lot. In just a moment, they arrived at the gate of the palace. Then, the carriage stopped and a somewhat anxious figure walked out. Who else could it be but Yang Qindong? With a golden cloak on his body, Yang Qindong became the center of everyone's attention the moment he appeared. As soon as he got down from the carriage, he walked straight to the girl in front of the line, little Xianxia. Yang Qindong gently picked up little Xianxia and spun her around in his arms. Immediately, giggles could be heard. Little Xianxia said without any feeling of unfamiliarity, "Father, spin faster, faster." This was one of the games that Xianxia was most willing to play when she was very young. She was also naturally bold and did not have the slightest fear of heights. Not only was she not afraid, but she was also very happy to play. Yang Qindong had been constantly training these past few years, and his strength had already reached the master realm. He did not know why he was tired, but he spun faster and faster. The two of them, one adult and one child, laughed continuously, attracting the attention of more people. At the same time, many people's faces revealed knowing smiles. After an unknown amount of time, a seemingly anxious voice sounded, "Father, the child also wants." Needless to say, the person who said this must be little Yang Bo. Only then did Yang Qindong lower his head to pay attention to his son, whose head only reached his knees. Regarding this son, Yang Qindong's impression of him was that he was still an infant drinking milk. However, he did not expect that after 2 years, he had grown so much. At that moment, his body only paused for a moment, then he reached out with his left hand to grab Yang Bo's body, and continued to spin with one hand each. With Yang Bo's little weight, it was naturally not in Yang Qindong's eyes. To him, there was no difference whether he spun 1 or 2. On the other hand, Yang Bo was suddenly grabbed and spun in the air. He was really uncomfortable, and the tender flesh on his face even piled up because of this, as if he was about to cry at any time. A real man should not be afraid of anything. Even if you bleed, you should not cry. Bo, you are the first real man of our young family's next generation. Even more so, you should not cry casually, understand? Yang Qindong noticed the change in Yang Bo's expression and opened his mouth to speak. This was the first time Yang Qindong had spoken in Yang Bo's memory. It could also be called the first time he had taught him. Yang Bo heard it particularly clearly. Although with his little brain, he did not quite understand the meaning of a real man, but when he saw his father's serious expression, he instinctively nodded. This child understands. I am a real man, I will not cry. Haha, good son. Yang Bo's performance made Yang Qindong very happy. At the same time, he praised him and spun even faster. After a while, the laughter of the father and son trio could be heard. Yang Qindong naturally knew the principle of going too far is as bad as falling short. After seeing the hot sweat on the heads of the daughter and son, Yang Qindong gently put them down, and with one hand in each hand, he strode into the palace. The main gate of the palace was already open. Usually, this gate would not be opened easily. Only when Hu Yan, as the first consort, went out would the gate be opened. Of course, Yang Qindong also had to follow this etiquette and treatment when he went in and out, but because he was often not at home, the gate was rarely opened for him. Now that Yang Qindong had returned, the real master had returned, the gate naturally had to be opened. In the palace square not far behind the gate, Hu Yan and the other 8 women were already waiting there with a group of maids. Yang Qindong now had 8 wives. Except for Hu Yan, who was the first consort, the others were all side consorts. Usually when Yang Qindong was not around, Hu Yan was in charge. Although the number of people was not small, they got along well. This was not only because Hu Yan had the ability to command, but also because these women could clearly see their own positions. Second, Madame Qiao Yin was born as a maid. Although she had followed Yang Qindong for the longest time, she had a sense of propriety when doing things, and she was very clear about who gave her everything. In her eyes, not only was Yang Qindong her master, Hu Yan was also her master, so she was naturally very obedient. Third, Madame Xiao Yuxue, and fourth, Madame Dong Xianxia. Both of them were of noble birth. If it were not for Yang Qindong's appearance, they would probably still be a concubine. Their living environment since young had long taught them who they could provoke and what they could not do. Facing the first consort, Hu Yan, who was a descendant of a famous family, they naturally respected her and did not dare to have any second thoughts. In the eyes of the two, it was already very fortunate that they were not disliked by Hu Yan. Fifth, Madame Tuoya. Although her background was not bad, the various clans were now led by the Han. Just based on this point, she had fallen far behind. After coming to the palace, there were many things that she had to learn. It was already very fortunate that Hu Yan did not pick on her, so how would she dare to pick on her? Sixth, Madame Luan Xiaoyu. She had suffered since young, and Yang Qindong's arrival changed her and her family's lives. In her eyes, Yang Qindong was her benefactor, and so was Hu Yan. Naturally, there was nothing that she would not listen to and obey. Seventh, Madame Su Man. Although she was also a descendant of an official, she had declined after all, and when she first came, she had the idea of assassinating Yang Qindong. It could be said that she was someone who had made a big mistake. It was already a blessing that she was not punished for it, so how would she dare to act recklessly? Chapter 1357. Eighth, Madame Junko was just a princess of a destroyed country. Moreover, she had lived in Yang village for many years and had lived under the influence of Hu Yan for many years. She had long known what could be done and what could not be done. Naturally, she was very obedient. The madams were all sensible people, and Hu Yan was also a reasonable woman. She never used her status to pressure others. In such a big environment, everyone was naturally good. Not to mention that Yang Qindong had also expressed that his wife did not need to be beautiful, virtuous, or noble. There was only one requirement, and that was that they must be sensible. Otherwise, they would not be fated to be together. If they were not fated to be together, it meant a lot of things. No one dared to make wild guesses. Once they were forced to leave the palace because of immorality, their life would be completely ruined. Although Yang Qindong gave people the feeling that he was very nostalgic, there were some things that could not be challenged lightly. No one could bear the consequences. Under various reasons and circumstances, the atmosphere in the palace was very harmonious. At least, Yang Qindong's important matters had never been delayed because of the harem. He was very satisfied with this point. Holding the small hands of his daughter and son, Yang Qindong immediately quickened his pace when he saw the 8 madams standing in the square waiting for him. He walked toward Hu Yan in the middle of the crowd. Yang Qindong returned to Qixin City. This news did not take long for the whole city to know. Then his figure continued to appear in various places. The munitions factory was the cornerstone of the development of the Yang faction. Accompanied by the chief engineer, Feng Ku, who was also his disciple, Yang Qindong inspected many places for 3 days in a row. He also provided a lot of valuable experience. If one wanted to create a firearm, the raw material had to be qualified first. The iron of ancient times did not meet the requirements. The finished firearms that were created would mostly explode. How to make steel, how to press satin, how to build lathes, the level of technical skills and so on had to complement each other. Fortunately, after years of hard work, there was already a set of effective standards. Yang Qindong didn't know much about these things, but there were many books in the warehouse. When they were taken out and placed in the hands of smart people, they would be able to make use of their advantages. Thus, according to the books, they would be able to create more suitable firearms. The Type 95, rocket launchers, grenades, bullets, and artillery shells had already been formed. Now, the materials were being turned into finished products. There would be more machine tools, and more firearms that Yang Qindong knew would be manufactured. Although it would be a long process, Yang Qindong knew that more haste, less speed. He did not ask Feng Ku to speed up the research. What he needed was a safe and stable development. Remember, every weapon you make has to be up to standard. When the soldiers are fighting at the front lines, they are fighting with their lives on the line. If the weapon is not up to standard, then there will be huge problems. Yang Chendong was in the large conference room of the munitions factory. He had a serious face as he spoke to Feng Ku and the other higher-ups of the munitions factory. The people below were all holding pens and recording with their heads lowered. Occasionally, when they looked up and saw Yang Chendong talking, they all had expressions of admiration and conviction on their faces. In the entire Xianxia, Yang Chendong was the undisputed leader. In the eyes of many people, he was an omnipotent existence. It was also because of his appearance that everyone was able to live a good life that they didn't even dare to imagine before. Because of this, no one in the Xianxia disobeyed his words, and no one didn't believe him. For firearms and weapons that can be produced and used normally, we can add more lathes to ensure quality and quantity. As for how much money you need in this regard, you can apply to Mr. Yu. In this regard, the city lord's mansion will also vigorously support. As he spoke, Yang Chendong nodded lightly to Yu Qian, who was sitting at the side. Yu Qian had been forcibly dragged to the munitions factory by Yang Chendong to participate in this meeting. Ever since he saw that Yu Qian had lost a lot of weight, Yang Chendong decisively gave the order that in the future, Yu Qian's job would be to take care of himself and listen as a supplement. What kind of person was Yu Qian, and how upright he was, the history books had already given the answer. This person was also a person who could see the big picture. This was very rare. It must be said that Xianxia didn't lack talents. After all, there were so many places for people to display their talents. As long as people were willing to work hard, there was a ready-made platform, and there was no need to be afraid of no results. But among these people, there were still too few who could see the big picture. Perhaps they were loyal enough, but their brains weren't flexible enough. Or perhaps they were clever enough, but they had too many tricks up their sleeves. These kinds of people weren't very useful. Who knew when they would cause a big mess? There were also some people who were steady enough, but they were too inflexible. This wasn't suitable for the rapidly developing Yang faction. In comparison, there were too few leaders like Yu Qian, who had a strength of character, was very calm, and could change according to the situation. Before a suitable replacement was found, Yu Qian's body naturally needed extra attention. Yang Chendong gave the order that in the future, he didn't need to worry about small things. He only needed to take care of the big things. So he brought Yu Qian with him wherever he went. While letting him relax, he also tried to change his way of working and his body's condition. In fact, Yang Chendong had already changed Yu Qian's life. If he hadn't appeared, Yu Qian would have been dead for more than 2 years. Yu Qian carefully listened to Yang Chendong's instructions to the munitions factory, nodding from time to time. In the past, it wasn't that he didn't pay attention to the munitions factory. It was just that he didn't understand the rules here. Usually, he only saw some words written on paper, and then some instructions on how to transfer money. Now that he was following Yang Chendong, he had a more intuitive understanding of the situation here. Of course, he knew the importance of the munitions factory. He immediately nodded. "King, don't worry." Unknowingly, Yu Qian also finally changed the way he addressed Yang Chendong. Just the word king was enough to prove that he recognized the other party in his heart. Speaking of which, people like Yu Qian had a very strong sense of loyalty to the king. Although the ancients often said that water could carry a boat, it could also sink a boat. They also often said that the people were the foundation of the country. But how many people could really do that? Even the previous Yu Qian couldn't do it. When there was a conflict between the king and the people, he would still consider things from the king's side. But now, after seeing Yang Chendong's actions, seeing the Han people living under the Yangxia's rule, and seeing how the Han people's lives were much better than before, and how the Han people were beginning to show their value, bringing all kinds of benefits to the Yangxia, he finally understood. The people. Just how powerful was the people? He finally understood what it meant to be a true citizen. He also finally understood that the people he served before were only the scholar officials and country gentry. He also finally understood that he had taken many detours before. Only the people at the bottom could represent the will of the people. As long as they lived well, the entire Yang faction would have unimaginable power. In other words, when Yang Chendong worked for the people, he was also working for himself. While creating good living conditions for the people, He was also paving the way for himself to achieve his goals and desires. When he really put the people first, his position became more and more stable, and the Xianxia's development also became more and more powerful. If one looked carefully at the development of the Xianxia, how could it not be a process of reform? Since ancient times, there were actually many so-called reforms. The famous ones were Wang Engxi's reform and the Wuxia reform, and the less famous ones were unknown. The only one that was successful was Xiangyang's reform. Why was that? It was because the reform was like cutting meat from the big clans, and it was like snatching food from the hands of the people who benefited from it. They had to face the obstruction of these powerful people. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was to succeed. Even with the support of the king, it was difficult to succeed. But looking at the development of the Xianxia, there was no such difficulty. First of all, the development of the Xianxia did not need the support of the big clans. Not only that, every time they occupied a piece of land, whether it was the local rich clans or the country gentry, they would become the first targets to be dealt with. Half of their family property would be confiscated, and then the whole clan would be divided into countless branches and moved to a foreign place. This made it impossible for them to work together to do anything that displeased the Xianxia. Second of all, with the help of Yang Chendong's various advanced ideas, Xianxia did not lack money. All he needed was people. He did not need the support of the big clans. As long as the people approved of him, he would be able to develop better. Third of all, from the beginning of the development of the Xianxia, he paid attention to fairness and justice. He paid attention to treating everyone equally. Because the guiding ideology played an important role, it changed the understanding of the people. This also greatly weakened the influence of the big clans. Fourth of all, Yang Chendong was a pioneer. He had the ability to keep his word. It could be said that as long as he did not make any mistakes, the development of the Xianxia would not have any problems. At the same time, he did not need to rely on anyone's strength. The big clans could not display their strength even if they wanted to. In short, the big clans did not have the opportunity to perform. They did not have the power, so all the changes could be carried out as they wished. No one could stop them. After leaving the ordnance factory, Yang Chendong, Yu Qian, and the others went to the secret tank base under the accompaniment of Feng Ku. They took out a total of 5 tanks from the warehouse and parked them there. One of them had been dismantled into countless pieces and became various small parts. The creation of a tank was a gradual process. It was not something that could be created just by saying that it could be created. Key components such as the engine were even more of a headache. Even Feng Ku, who was regarded as a once-in-a-century genius and had great talent, was helpless. Therefore, he used the stupidest method, which was to imitate. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.